A guy in a dirty tunic stands by the water and shouts to the sinking ship about the depths and the channel. The captain looks at him as if he were mad. A skinny, ragged man on a barren rock in the middle of the ocean is telling a sailor with 20 years of experience how to enter the bay. And the reefs are already 200 meters away, and the captain has no other options. Let's rewind a week. Dan Corvishy opens his eyes and immediately squints. The sun is beating down on his face. His cheek is stuck to the scorching rock. His tongue is dry as sandpaper. His body is already counting down the final hours before death by thirst. He sits up. The hands are not his own, longer than he remembered, with calluses on the fingers he never rubbed raw. Above him is a foreign sky, higher, whiter, empty. Not a cloud, not a bird, not a trace of an airplane. Two sets of memories unfold in his head at once, like two files opened simultaneously. The first, Dan Corvish, the Baron's youngest son, exiled to the island for asking inconvenient questions at the Duke's council. The ship left 8 hours ago. The second, Daniel Hyun-so, a logistics engineer from San Diego, 28 years old, killed at a gas station. He shakes his head. Both files remain. He stands up. His knees are shaking. He surveys the entire island because he is standing at its highest point, a bare gray rock 200 meters across. To the north, a strip of greenery. To the south, a sandy spit stretches into the water. All around, the sea stretches to the horizon. Not a sail, not a shore, not a wisp of smoke. He is alone, on a piece of rock in the middle of an unfamiliar world, without water, no food, no tools. And that's when what will save his life kicks in. An engineer's mind that has been calculating cargo flows for 15 years produces a cold calculation instead of panic. 2 days without water, 2 weeks with water but no food. So water is the top priority. And at that moment, a translucent window flashes at the edge of his vision. Like a notification on a phone, it just hangs in the air. Location pinned, blueprint available. A solar condenser. Build it. He stares at that window for a long time. Then he gasps aloud. Yes, very much so. A 3-dimensional diagram with dimensions unfolds in his mind. A flat stone, a 12-degree slope, a groove around the perimeter, a drain at the lowest point. The principle is simple. At night, the stone cools. In the morning, warm air from the sea touches the cold surface. Condensation drips into the cup. Half a cup overnight, enough to not die tomorrow. He finds a flat slate among the bushes, grabs a sharp stone, scrapes the groove until his palms bleed. An hour. 2. By sunset, the groove runs all the way around the perimeter. He inserts a shell fragment into the drain like a cup. The system flashes. Complete. A 15% performance bonus. The system gives more than physics. He collapses nearby and falls asleep under foreign stars. He wakes up before dawn from the icy wind. He crawls on all fours toward the condenser. Water glistens in the shell. 100 grams. He drinks every last drop. And for the first time, he feels he might not die. After that, he works like a man possessed. He builds a fish trap out of stones in the shallows. The tide drives the fish inside. The ebb locks them in. In the morning, there are 3 silvery fish in the trap. He eats 1 raw. His stomach accepts it. But without fire, the fish will go bad in half a day. He needs fire. He rubs his hands raw, making fire by friction. The stick breaks. Then the system illuminates yellow flecks in the stone. Iron pyrite. He pries out a piece. He strikes the pyrite with flint. A shower of sparks flies onto the dry grass. On the fifth strike, it catches fire. Fire. Small, but fire. He doesn't shout or rejoice. He assembles the smokehouse according to the plan. Smoke. Cold smoking. Now the fish will last 9 days. On the fourth day, he hauls stones from dawn to dusk and assembles a hut without mortar, like a puzzle. By the sixth day, a roof of fins and leaves is over him. For the first time, he sleeps not on bare rock. And all this time, every morning, he stands on the summit and looks out at the empty sea. Morning of the seventh day. The sea is not empty. A sail on the horizon. And this is where the most important part begins. The sail isn't going away. It's getting closer. Lopsided. Swaying. The sail is torn to shreds. The mast juts out at an angle. The ship is drifting, and the wind is carrying it straight toward the reefs north of the island. Daniel races toward the shore faster than he has moved all these days. A 20-meter cog. People on deck. 3, maybe 4. They see the reefs. They know they're being carried onto the rocks, and they can't do anything because you can't maneuver without a mast. And in Daniel's mind, that same mechanism unfolds the plan. Reefs to the north, shallow water to the east. The only passage is from the south along the spit. For the last 2 days, he's been gauging the depth by dropping stones on a rope made of grass. A habit. At the tip of the spit, 4 meters. Further on, 3. Then 2. The cog will make it through if it enters exactly along the line. He grabs a piece of chalk. He draws an arrow on a boulder with depth markings. 4, 3, 2. A turn. The shore. Then he takes a skin of water, his morning ration, half a cup, all he has. He takes a bundle of smoked fish, 3 fish, all he has. And he goes down to the water's edge. The cog is 300 meters away. It's being carried toward the reefs. On deck, a gray-haired captain with a weather-beaten face looks toward the shore, at the rock, at the man in a dirty tunic with a skin and fish. And so, we're back where we started. Daniel takes a deep breath and shouts. Not straight toward the shore. The draft is too deep. Enter the sandbar from the leeward side along the line. He points to the arrow on the rock. The captain stares for a long time. A man in a tattered tunic on a deserted island is shouting at him about the channel. Nonsense. But the reefs are 200 meters away, and there are no other options. The captain turns the wheel. The cog turns around. It heads along the sandbar. Where the keel has 4 meters of clearance, it passes freely. Where there are 3, the hull almost kisses the sand. But it gets through. An hour later, the cog stands intact at the sandbar. The captain's name is Bran Merrick, 20 years at sea. He lost his cargo in a storm. On the mainland, the gallows await him for debts owed to the guild. He and 3 dead sailors who were lucky enough to find a rock in the ocean. Bran goes ashore. Daniel hands him some water. Bran drinks. He eats fish in silence. He looks at the smokehouse, at the hut, at the condenser, at the trap, at the depth gauge. Then he asks who he is. Daniel replies that he is the master of this island and that he has a business proposal. And Bran doesn't laugh, because he saw that the depths were accurate. He saw that this skinny guy had single-handedly built 4 functional structures in a week, and he saw that the guy gave him his water and his food, everything he had. Bran asks what the proposal is, and Daniel begins to speak. About the war on the continent, about closed mountain passes and burned bridges, about caravans being robbed at every turn, about how, sooner or later, trade will drive to the sea, and there isn't a single neutral port at sea, not a single one. And this island stands at the intersection of two routes. Here we can build a dock, a shipyard, a warehouse, evaporate salt from the sea and sell it, smoke fish and sell it, repair ships, provide fresh water to every captain setting out on a 2-week voyage. Bran listens in silence. Then he asks, "What do you need?" Daniel answers simply, "A ship, for 3 voyages." Bran brings planks, nails, tools, and cloth from the mainland, in exchange for salt, free mooring, repairs, and a share in the port. Bran is silent for a long time. Then he says he has nowhere to return to, that they'll hang him, that the ship is broken and won't make it to shore without repairs, that he either stays or dies. Daniel nods. He knew that. He understood when he saw the torn sail. Bran didn't choose. He had no choice. But Daniel made that lack of choice look like an opportunity. And that is his first lesson in this new world. People don't follow their dreams. People go where they have nothing to lose. And then they stay because they find something they no longer want to lose. Repairing the cog took 9 days. Daniel took the mast apart down to its base. The wood was split in 3 places. Bran stood nearby and shook his head. He said that on the mainland such a repair would take a month and cost 20 silver pieces. Daniel said nothing. He looked at the mast and saw not a breakdown, but a problem. The split fibers, the length of the crack, the depth of the damage. He didn't need to replace the mast. He needed to apply a splint, like to a broken bone. He cut 4 long pieces of the fin he'd been hauling from the shore these past few days. He smoothed them with a stone. He applied them to the mast. He tied them with a rope made of stiff grass. The rope was weak. It kept snapping. He made a triple braid. Then he soaked the knots in resin he'd found among the bushes on the north shore. Sticky, dark, stinky, but it hardened in the sun and held tight. The mast wasn't like new, but it was serviceable. Bran tried hoisting the sail. The mast held. He looked at Daniel with an expression the engineer had previously seen only on the faces of clients. When an engineer solves a problem everyone thought unsolvable, not admiration, caution. Because if this guy can do this, what else can he? While Bran and his 3 sailors prepared the cog for its first voyage, Daniel was building a salt farm. The system produced the blueprint on the 3rd day after the mast was repaired, a cascade of pools, level 1. The principle was simple. Seawater is poured into the upper pool. The sun evaporates the water. Salt remains. But Daniel knew from his past life that a single deep pool is inefficient. Water evaporates from the surface. The shallower the pool, the greater the surface area relative to its volume. So many small pools are needed. A cascade. The top basin is the largest. Water from it flows into 2 smaller ones, from those into 4 even smaller ones. The salt concentration increases at each level. At the bottom level, the water is already thick. 1 more day in the sun, and a white crust remains. Salt. He found a suitable spot on the southern slope, a flat stone platform facing the sun. The wind from the south dries the surface. Perfect. 12 basins, 4 levels. 3 on the first, 3 on the second, 3 on the third, 3 on the fourth. Each basin is 1 meter by 1 meter, 10 centimeters deep. Walls made of stone, coated with clay from the north shore. He worked for 3 days. He rubbed his hands raw. The clay didn't hold well until he figured out to add ash from the fire to it. Ash and clay. An old recipe. From a past life. From a documentary he watched in his junior year. On the 4th day, the first batch of seawater was poured into the upper pools. Bran helped carry the water in leather bags, silently. He still didn't fully understand why. 3 days later, a white film appeared on the lower basins. 5 days later, Daniel collected the first salt. A handful, 200 grams, white, coarse, with a bitter aftertaste of magnesium. Not perfect, but salt. Bran tasted it, spit it out, looked at Daniel, then said that on the continent, a pound of such salt was worth 2 silver coins. In port cities, 3. In besieged cities, 10. Daniel nodded. He knew that. Not from Dan Corvus's memories. From logic. War cuts off land routes. Salt mines in the north. The southern kingdoms are cut off. Demand is rising. Supply drops. Prices skyrocket. And he has an endless source of raw materials. The sea. The system flashed. Salt cascade. Level 1 complete. Production bonus plus 15%. Bran left on a cog 2 days later. Daniel gave him a list. Planks, long ones, pine or oak. Nails, iron ones, various sizes. A hammer, a saw, rope. Real rope, not grass. Cloth, any kind, for sails and shelters. And chalk. Lots of chalk. Bran asked what he was going to trade it for. Daniel showed him a bag, a small leather pouch from one of the sailors. Salt inside, 3 pounds. Everything the crew had produced in the first week. Bran weighed the bag in his palm. 3 pounds of salt. 6 silver coins in a regular port, 9 in a military one. 30 on the black market of a besieged city. Bran left. Daniel was left alone. Again. The first time, the loneliness was terrifying. The second time, the loneliness was work. He knew Bran would return, not because Bran was a good man, but because Bran had done the math and realized it was profitable. While Bran was away, Daniel built. Every day, from dawn to dusk. He expanded the cascade, added 6 more pools. Now there were 18. Salt output doubled. He built a fish dryer, a long row of poles made from fin. Fish hang on them, dried in the wind and sun. Slower than smoking, but requires no fire or smoke. More fish can be processed at once. The system gave a 10% bonus to storage. He expanded the fish trap, now 2 semicircles. The catch grew to 5 or 6 fish a day, more than he could eat. The surplus goes to the drying rack. He started building a pier, without planks, out of stone. A long stone ridge along the spit, an underwater foundation of boulders. He hauled them into the water, chest deep. The water was cold. The stones were heavy. Every evening he lay down on the grass in the hut and couldn't move his arms. But the foundation was growing, meter by meter. By the end of the second week of solitude, the stone foundation of the pier was 10 meters long. Not a pier yet, a foundation. But when Bran brought the planks, decking would be laid on top, and it would become a pier. A real pier. Bran returned 16 days later. Daniel stood on the shore and watched as the cog entered the bay along the same channel. Bran steered confidently. He had memorized the depths. Everything on the deck was on the list. Planks, nails, a hammer, a saw, rope, cloth, chalk. And beyond the list, 3 sacks of grain and a barrel of beer. Bran said the salt had sold for 9 silver pieces at the port of Karvina. The city was under siege. Salt was worth its weight in gold. With the change, he bought everything Daniel had asked for, plus the grain and beer. Daniel looked at the grain. Grain isn't food. Grain is seeds. He asked if there were vegetable seeds at the Karvina market. Bran said there were. Daniel said he needed seeds for the next trip. Turnips, onions, cabbage. Something that grows quickly and doesn't require good soil. Bran looked at the bare rock and asked where exactly Daniel planned to grow it. Daniel pointed to the northern shore, a strip of greenery. There is soil there, a thin layer, but there is some. It can be deepened. Add humus from fish waste, compost. Daniel had been piling fish bones and guts into a pit by the bushes for a month. In 2 months, it would be fertilizer. Bran said nothing. He had long since stopped being surprised. For the next 2 weeks, they worked together, Bran and his 3 sailors, 4 pairs of hands plus Daniel, 5 men, the pier, planks on a stone foundation, nails in the planks, rope fenders along the edge, 10 meters of decking. Not large, but enough for 1 cog. The system counted it. Simple pier, level 1, complete. Unloading speed bonus plus 10%. Daniel stood on the pier. On his pier. The planks flexed under his feet. It smelled of fresh wood and resin. Bran stood beside him. Both were silent. Then Bran said that in 20 years at sea he'd seen many ports, and that this was the smallest and the strangest. A pier on a bare rock in the middle of the ocean. But it stood firm. Daniel said it wasn't a port. Not yet a port. A port is when there's a second ship. Bran smiled. The second ship arrived a week later, a merchant barge from the port of Lisan, a crew of 12. The captain's name was Rolf, broad-shouldered, red-bearded, angry. His ship had taken on water through a hole below the waterline. He was looking for shore. Any shore. He saw the smoke from Daniel's fire and turned. When the barge pulled up to the pier, Rolf went ashore and looked around. A rock. A hut. A smokehouse. Salt pans. A pier. Rolf asked what kind of place this was. Daniel replied that it was the port of Greystone. Rolf laughed. Then he stopped laughing, because Daniel wasn't joking. Daniel proposed a deal. He would repair the hole. Bran would help. They had planks and pitch. The repair would take 2 days. In exchange, Rolf would leave 200 pounds of grain from his hold and 5 coils of rope. Rolf said it was robbery. Daniel said the nearest port was 4 days' sail away. With the hole, Rolf won't make it. In a day, the barge will start sinking. 200 pounds of grain or the ocean floor. Rolf chose the grain. The repair took a day and a half. Bran knew where to patch it. Daniel knew how. A standard patch, 3 planks, resin, a tow rope that Bran had brought from the mainland. Rolf left, angry, but alive, and with an intact hull. A month later he returned, not because he wanted to, because he had broken down again. The rudder. This time Daniel paid less, 100 pounds of grain, and information. He asked Rolf about the war, about prices in the ports, about which routes were still open. Rolf told him. The eastern pass is closed. Carvin is under siege. Lina is burning. The E route was controlled by bandits. Only the most desperate traveled by sea. There were few ports. None were safe at all. Daniel listened and took notes, with chalk on stone, because he had no paper. A map of routes, a map of prices, a map of the war. Everything on stones, everything in chalk. Rolf left and told 2 captains he knew about the strange island. 2 weeks later, the first of them arrived. Then the second. Then a third, a stranger who had heard about it from someone in the tavern. By the end of the 3rd month, 2 or 3 ships were coming into the bay each week. Not many, but consistently. Every ship left something behind. Planks, nails, cloth, grain, tools, sometimes money. Copper coins, silver, rarely. Daniel didn't save money. He spent it right away. On supplies, on food, on seeds. The island was growing, slowly, but growing. The pier had been extended to 20 meters. A storage shed had gone up nearby. The cascade of pools had expanded to 24. Salt production was 300 pounds a month. The fish smokehouse had doubled in size, 3 traps instead of 2. A vegetable garden on the north shore, turnips and onions, just sprouts so far, but sprouts. And at that moment a passenger arrived on a merchant ship from the port of Lisan. A woman, young, dark hair pulled back into a bun. Her clothes were expensive, but dirty and torn. Her eyes were hard. She stepped onto the pier and looked around with the expression of someone who sees the last place on earth they'd ever want to be. Her name was Sarah Lynn, a former priestess of the Temple of the Bright Hand. A fugitive. A fugitive. She asked the ship's captain if she could stay here. The captain said it wasn't his business. It was the island owner's business. He pointed at Daniel. Sarah looked at him. Skinny, tanned to the point of blackness, hands covered in calluses and scars, clothes barely better than rags. The island owner. She asked if she could stay. Daniel asked what she could do. She said she could heal. Daniel asked how she would prove it. And at that moment, one of Bran's sailors groaned from the dock. He had cut his leg on a rusty nail 2 days ago. The wound had become infected. His leg was swollen. The redness was spreading upward. Sarah looked at his leg. Then, silently, she opened her only bag. She took out a linen bundle. She unwrapped it. Herbs, powders, small stone mortars. She washed the wound with seawater. She applied a compress of something green and pungent smelling. She bandaged it with a strip of cloth. After a day, the redness began to subside. 3 days later, the sailor was walking. Daniel saw it all, in silence. On the 4th day, he approached Sarah and unfolded a birch bark sheet in front of her, on which lines had been drawn in charcoal. She asked what it was. He said it was a blueprint of the infirmary. 4 walls, a roof, 2 beds, shelves for medicine, a south-facing window for light, a door, and not a single religious symbol. Not one. He said this was her place, that she should tell him what to change. Sarah looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she said quietly that the window should be bigger, and that the shelves needed to be lower because she wasn't very tall. Daniel nodded. He took a piece of charcoal. He redrew it. That's how the infirmary's construction began. They built the infirmary over 2 weeks. Daniel, Bran, 2 sailors. Sarah didn't build it. Sarah stood nearby and pointed out what was wrong. The window was too narrow. The doorway was too low. The shelves were too far from the beds. Every time, Daniel would stop and redo it. Bran couldn't take it anymore one time and said that they were builders here, not servants to a capricious woman. Daniel looked at him and said that it wasn't a whim. This was a doctor's workplace. If a doctor couldn't reach a shelf without getting up from a stool, then the shelf was in the wrong place. Bran, silence. By the end of the 2nd week, the infirmary was finished. Stone walls, a roof made of planks Bran had brought, 2 wooden beds stuffed with dry grass, shelves at the right height, a large south-facing window, a door that closes, and not a single symbol. No statues, no signs, no prayer niche, just a room. Clean, bright, functional. The system flashed. Infirmary, level 1, complete. Recovery bonus plus 15%. This meant that wounds healed a little faster, illnesses receded a little sooner. Not magic, not a miracle, just 15%. But for a sailor with a festering wound, 15% is the difference between a leg and a stump. Sira entered the infirmary in the evening, alone. Daniel saw from the window of the hut how she stood in the middle of the room, not moving. She just stood there, staring at the empty shelves. Then she sat down on a cot. She ran her hand over the wood, and in that moment, Daniel realized one important thing. He wasn't building a structure. He was building a place. A place where, for the first time in 2 years, Sira could be unafraid, not hide, not look over her shoulder, not explain why she had run away, and not expect to be punished for it. Just a room with shelves and a south-facing window. Her room. He turned away from the window and returned to his notes. Chalk maps on flat stones, routes, prices, trade flows. War was spreading across the continent. Rolf had brought news. Lina had fallen. The southern port of Kalteris was closed. The Merchants' Guild was ruined. 3 of the 7 kingdoms were now at war simultaneously. All the mountain passes were closed, every single one. Maritime trade was no longer an alternative. It was the only way. And Greystone stands exactly where it needs to, the 4th month. The island has changed. Daniel stood atop the cliff and saw below him not just bare rock, but the beginning of something. A pier, an infirmary, a smokehouse, a drying shed, 24 salt pans, a vegetable garden, Daniel's hut, Bran's hut and the sailors' quarters, a storage shed by the pier, paths worn between the buildings. The system gave him a bird's-eye view, a map of the island, with annotations. What has been built, what can be built, what was blocked. A new blueprint had appeared 3 days ago. The lighthouse. Level 1. Serious requirements. A 10-meter-high stone tower, a volcanic glass lens, an oil lamp, a platform at the top. He couldn't build it alone, not even with 5 people. He needed more people, more hands, more materials. And they came. Not according to plan, out of necessity. The 5th month. There are now 12 people on the island. Bran and his 3 sailors. Sarah, 2 sailors from a merchant ship who decided to stay after the captain didn't pay their wages. An old fisherman from Kalteris whose port was burned down. His wife. 2 guys from a ravaged village on the coast. A 15-year-old named Tan who simply refused to return to the ship and said he wanted to live here. 12 people. A small community on the cliff. Daniel gave everyone a job. He didn't ask, he gave. The fisherman got the traps. His wife got the smokehouse and the drying shed. The 2 sailors got the dock extension. 2 guys from the village for the salt pans. Tan did everything because he was 15 and eager to work. Bran on trading voyages, 3 sailors under him. Sarah in the infirmary. Daniel on construction and record-keeping. Record-keeping. This was new. Before, when he was alone, he kept the accounts in his head. Now he had to write them down, with chalk on stones. Who came to the island? When? On which ship? What they brought? What they took? What he owed? What was owed to him? Every ship, every cargo, every transaction. Daniel drew tables with chalk on a large flat rock by the pier. Captains came over and watched. Some laughed. Some guy on the rock is writing in chalk who brought what and how much. A month later, they stopped laughing, because something happened. The captain of a merchant schooner from Lisan came and declared that last time he had left 300 pounds of grain at the warehouse for repairs, and that now he wanted to take 200 pounds of salt as agreed. Daniel looked at the stone. He found the entry. 300 pounds of grain. Repair of the steering mechanism. Agreement. 150 pounds of salt. Not 200. The captain started arguing. Daniel showed him the stone, the date, the captain's name, the ship's name, the amount of grain, the terms of the exchange. 150. The captain looked at the record, at Daniel, at the record. He fell silent. He took the 150. He left. After that incident, every captain who entered the port knew. In stone, everything is recorded. You can't cheat. You can't forget. You can't lie. The rumor spread faster than any advertisement. 6th month. Shipyard. The system provided the blueprint at the beginning of the month. Small shipyard. Level 1. Not shipbuilding. Repairs. A shed by the pier. A log slipway. A place where you can pull a ship ashore and work on the hull. For this, you need a sloped slipway. You need log rails. You need a winch. Daniel didn't have a winch. But he had a block, a wooden one, from a merchant ship. The captain traded it for sail repairs. One pulley is a single block and tackle. It doubles the force. Not enough for a ship, but 2 pulleys make a double block and tackle. It quadruples the force. He needed a second block. Daniel made it himself. A wooden roller. An axle made from an iron rod found on one of the ships. A frame made of hardwood. Rough, but it worked. 6 of them built the slipway. It took 2 weeks. Heavy logs brought by Bran from the mainland, dug into the sand by the pier. The slope was calculated, just enough so that the ship would slide down under its own weight and be pulled up by the winch. The first ship hoisted onto the slipway was Bran's cog. The hull had become overgrown with seaweed and shells over the past 6 months. Its speed had dropped by 1/3. Daniel and 2 sailors spent 2 days scraping the overgrown hull. Then they treated it with resin. The cog was launched. Bran sailed around the bay and returned with the half-long of a man who had received a new ship. Its speed returned. It even increased slightly because the system granted a bonus. Small shipyard. Level 1. Completed. Repair quality bonus plus 10%. News of the shipyard spread across the sea within 2 weeks. A shipyard. The only one within a 2-week sail. Captains who used to stop at Grey Rock for salt and water now stopped for repairs. The flow doubled. 5 or 6 ships a week. Daniel could no longer handle it alone. He needed someone to keep records, someone who would write down who came, what they brought, and what they took, while he built and designed. Yoona So-hyun arrived in the middle of the 6th month, on a foreign merchant ship, as a passenger. She had 8 copper coins in her pocket. Daniel learned her story from the captain of the ship that brought her, the daughter of a merchant ship captain. Her father died in a storm. She took his ship. The crew wouldn't accept a female captain. A year later, she lost the ship. She lost everything. She stepped onto the pier and surveyed the island with the gaze of a professional looking at a familiar scene. She looked at the pier, at the mooring lines, at the warehouse shed, at how the arriving ship was being unloaded. And Daniel saw what she saw. She saw that the porters were walking the same path as the loaded carts, that the sacks were being stacked not by weight, but haphazardly, that the ropes lay by the pier rather than on hooks. She saw chaos. Minor, invisible to an ordinary person, but not to a captain, not to someone who grew up on deck. Daniel approached her and said he had a job for her. She asked what kind. He said he needed a port clerk, someone to keep the ledger, who came, what they brought, what they took, where to put it, when to release it. Yoona looked at him. He was offering her a job as a clerk. To her, the captain. She said she wasn't a clerk. Daniel replied that he wasn't asking her to write. He was asking her to manage. The person who controls the registry controls the port, because without his entry, no ship will get a berth. No cargo will make it to the warehouse. No deal will be confirmed. He said it wasn't just a pen and ink. It was power. Yuna was silent. For a long time. Then she asked how much he paid. Daniel said he pays with housing, food, a share of the port's profits, and the right to decide who docks and who waits. Yuna agreed. Not right away. A day later, because she had nowhere else to go. Just like Branu, just like Sarah, just like everyone who stayed on the island. People don't come to Greystone because it's nice here. They come because everywhere else is bad. And here, you can work. Yuna took the register on the 3rd day. By the 4th day, she had already transcribed all of Daniel's entries from the stones onto birch bark. On the 5th day, she drew up a schedule for docking at the pier. Ships no longer crowded together. One at the pier, a second in the roadstead, a third waits. Order. On the 6th day, she caught a sailor from a merchant ship trying to carry a sack of salt out of the warehouse without paying. She didn't shout. She didn't call for help. She simply stood in front of him and said that the logbook stated his ship had received 300 pounds of salt. The warehouse had shipped 300. The sack on his shoulder was the first of 300. The sailor put the sack down, silently. Daniel saw this scene from the top of the cliff, and for the first time in 6 months on this island, he felt that he didn't have to do everything himself. Yuna wasn't just taking notes. She was in charge. She knew every captain by name. She knew every ship by name. She knew who paid on time and who was dragging their feet. She knew who was smuggling contraband under legal cargo. She knew because she watched. Just as her father had taught her. Just as she herself had learned over the years on deck. A week later, Daniel realized that Yuna saw the port better than he did. He saw the layout. She saw the people. The end of the 6th month. Daniel stood atop a cliff and counted. 23 people on the island. A 20-meter pier. A shipyard for 1 ship. An infirmary. 24 salt pools. The 7th month began with a problem. Daniel had been expecting a problem. He considered every day without a crisis a delay before the next one. The problem arrived in the form of 3 ships at once, 2 merchant ships and 1 packed with people, refugees. 30 people, women, children, old people, from a coastal village burned down by the Eastern Crown's army. They had nothing. Only the clothes on their backs. The captain who brought them didn't want them. He had picked them up on the open sea because refusing to help would have meant letting 30 people, including children, drown, but he couldn't feed them. He dropped them off at the pier and left. 30 people stood on the pier planks and looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at them, then at Yuna. Yuna silently held up a birch bark scroll. Supplies. 200 pounds of grain, 100 pounds of dried fish, 200 pounds of smoked fish, salt, fresh water for 23 people. Now for 53. The supplies would last a week, 10 days at most. This was the first real choice. Not an engineering problem, not a blueprint, not a calculation. A human choice. 30 people, hungry, homeless, without a destination, with no way to leave. He could have refused, said there weren't enough resources, that the island wasn't ready. That would have been the truth. Bran stood nearby, silent, waiting for a decision. Sarah stood by the infirmary and waited too. Yuna held a scroll and didn't look up. Daniel looked at the 30 people. Among them was a woman holding a little girl in her arms. The girl was about 4 years old. Her face was dirty. Her eyes were huge. She wasn't crying. Children who have been through something like this don't cry. They stay silent. Daniel turned to Yuna and said, "Write this down." Yuna raised her head. Daniel began to speak. 30 people. An assignment for each. Women with cooking experience to the smokehouse and kitchen. Men to the construction site and the quarry. Children over 10 to the fish traps under supervision. The elderly to salt sorting. 2 men who looked stronger than the rest to the pier expansion. The woman with the child to the infirmary to see Sarah. Food for everyone. 1 serving of fish in the morning, 1 serving of porridge in the evening. The same ration for everyone on the island, including Daniel himself. No privileges. Yuna took notes, quickly, in neat handwriting. When he finished, she looked at him and said the supplies wouldn't be enough. Daniel said he knew. He'd already done the math. He needed to triple the fish catch in a week, expand the traps, set new ones, double the size of the smokehouse, and send Bran for grain immediately. An emergency trip. Salt in exchange for grain. The entire supply. 300 pounds. Bran left the next morning, 3 sailors with him. Daniel built 3 new fish traps in 2 days, with the help of new people. The men from the village hauled stones. They didn't ask why. They were told to do it, and they did. Because doing something is better than sitting and waiting. The second smokehouse in 3 days. Bigger than the first. 8 poles instead of 4. Space for 30 fish at a time. The system flashed. Fish smokehouse. Level 2. Storage bonus plus 25% instead of 20. An upgrade. He hadn't expected it. The system didn't just count the structures. It improved them as they expanded. Among the refugees was a woman named Mei Lin Zhao. Daniel noticed her on the second day. She was fixing the lock on the door of the storage shed. The lock was jammed. 3 sailors had tried to fix it. They couldn't. She walked over, looked, asked for a hammer and a thin nail, took the mechanism apart, straightened the latch, put it back together. The lock worked. Repair time? 1 hour. Daniel walked up to her. He asked who she was. Mei Lin said she was a blacksmith. Not a blacksmith's daughter, not a blacksmith's wife. A blacksmith. Daniel looked at her hands. Broad palms. Calluses in the usual places. Burns on her forearms. The hands of someone who had worked at the forge for years. He asked what she needed to work. She looked at him suspiciously. Usually, that question is asked before explaining why a woman can't be a blacksmith. Daniel waited for her answer. No trickery, no smile, no hidden meaning. Mei Lin said she needed a forge, an anvil, tools, coal, and iron. Daniel nodded. He said he would build the forge within a month. He would order the anvil from Bran on the mainland. The tools as well. Coal could be made from wood. Iron would be brought in by merchant ships, and that the smithy would be located by the port. In the best spot, because a smithy next to the shipyard isn't a convenience, it's a necessity. Mei Lin looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "All right." Not, "Thank you." Not, "I'm so grateful." Just, "All right." Like a craftsman accepting an order. Daniel noted to himself that this was the right reaction. He wasn't doing her a favor. He was hiring a specialist. And she understood that. The 8th month. The smithy. A forge made of stone coated with clay and ash. Bellows made of goat skin brought by Bran. An anvil. A real one. iron. It cost 200 pounds of salt. Bran had haggled on the continent for 3 days. Maylin stood before the forge and didn't move for a minute. Then she lit the fire, blowed the bellows, placed the first piece of iron in the coals, waited until it glowed a light orange, pulled it out, struck the anvil. The ringing echoed across the island. People stopped. They turned their heads toward the smithy. The ringing of a hammer on red-hot iron, the sound of construction, the sound of the future. Maylin was working. The first order, fasteners for the pier, staples, hinges, nails. Not unique, standard, identical. That was Daniel's requirement. Standardization. He explained to Maylin why. If every staple is unique, then when it needs replacing, a new one has to be forged on the spot. If the staples are standard, there's a stock in the warehouse and replacement takes a minute. Maylin listened. She thought. She said it was boring. Daniel agreed. Boring, but effective. Maylin smiled and began forging a batch of identical clamps, 18 a day, each one the twin of the one before. A week later, Daniel had 96 standard clamps in his warehouse, 4 sizes, 24 of each. Any ship coming in for repairs could get the right staple in a minute. On the mainland, such a staple would take 3 days to forge because each one was made from scratch. The captains noticed. Quickly, word got around. At Grey Rock, repairs take a day, not a week, because they have spare parts there, ready-made, standard, on the shelf. The 9th month. 48 people on the island. A steady stream of ships, 7 or 8 a week. 2 docks. The second was built in 3 weeks with the help of the new residents. The cascade has been expanded to 36 basins. Salt output is 500 pounds a month. A warehouse. A real warehouse. Stone walls, a roof, lockable doors. Order inside. Barrels of salt are numbered. Bags of grain are numbered. Coils of rope on the shelves. Tools on the wall. Una kept a record of everything. Every barrel, every sack, every nail. The system gave the warehouse a bonus, a 15% increase in preservation. This meant that the goods spoiled more slowly. Nails rusted more slowly. Ropes rotted more slowly. Small things, but small things added up to an advantage. The tavern. It was built at the end of the 9th month, not for entertainment, for business. Captains come into port. They need a place to eat, to drink, to exchange news, a place where deals are made, where the crews are, where a captain without sailors finds sailors without a captain. The tavern is a labor exchange, an information center, and a dining hall all at once. It took 2 weeks to build. Stone walls, a spacious hall, long tables, a bar, a kitchen, a room for lodging upstairs. The manager was a fisherman's wife from Calteris, a woman who had fed crews in port taverns for 20 years and knew how to make a dinner for 10 out of 3 fish and a handful of flour. The system flashed. Tavern, level 1, complete. Bonus, information flow plus 10%. Daniel didn't immediately understand what that meant. Then he did. The system considered information a resource. The tavern generated information. News, rumors, prices, routes. Everything the captain said at the table now surfaced in his mind a little more easily. Not telepathy, not eavesdropping. He simply became better at picking up on slips of the tongue and hints and connecting scattered facts. A strange bonus, but a useful one. The 10th month. Daniel was sitting in the tavern in the evening, a rare occurrence. Usually he wasn't sitting there. Usually he was building or drawing or calculating. But today, he was sitting and listening. At a table in the back, 2 captains were discussing the war. The Eastern Crown had gone on the offensive. Duke Valson's army was moving south. 3 cities had fallen in a month. The northern kingdoms were preparing a response. The Salt League was ramping up the pressure. Salt prices had tripled. Daniel listened and thought. Salt. His salt. 500 pounds a month. In 3 months, it would be 1,000. In 6 months, 2,000. The Salt League controlled the salt on the continent. Mines, quarries, caravans. A monopoly that had lasted 100 years. And he simply evaporated seawater. Free raw material. An endless supply. The League doesn't know that yet. But it will. And when it does, he'll have a problem. A big problem. He finished his water, stood up, left the tavern. Night. Stars. Foreign constellations he'd already grown accustomed to. The sea roared against the pier. Somewhere to the right, a fire glowed in Sarah's infirmary. To the left, Mei Lin's hammer clanged. She was working late. Right in front of him on the pier stood Yuna, checking the mooring lines for the night. Daniel stood and looked at his island. Not a rock. Not a camp. Already a settlement. A small one, fragile, vulnerable. 50 people on a rock in the middle of the sea. No walls, no army, no allies. If someone serious decided to crush them, they'd be crushed in an hour. He needed protection. Not walls. Walls are useless on an island. A fleet, or whatever can replace a fleet until there is one. He returned to the hut. He took out a piece of birch bark, a charcoal pencil, and began to sketch. Not a pier, not a warehouse, not a pool. A catapult. Or rather, not a catapult. A ballista. A stone-throwing device that could be placed on a cliff and would strike ships entering the bay. He remembered the general principle from his past life. A torsion mechanism. Twisted ropes acting like a spring. A lever, a sling, a stone. The system flashed when he finished sketching the 3rd version. A rock ballista. Level 1. Blueprint available. He looked at the system blueprint. It was better than his own, more precise, with dimensions, with tolerances, with material specifications. Rope. Lots of rope. Wood. Sturdy. Oak or ash. Iron parts, brackets, axles. A projectile tip. He could build this with Mei Lin for the iron. With the new settlers' carpenters for the wood. A month's work, maybe a month and a half. Daniel marked 3 points on the island map. Building the first ballista took 6 weeks. Mei Lin forged the iron parts, axles, brackets, fasteners, the thrust plate. 2 carpenters from among the new settlers hewn the wooden components. A lever made of oak brought by Bran. A frame made of ash. Daniel assembled everything on the northern cliff. The location was not chosen at random. The northern cliff is the highest point on the island. The entire bay is visible from there. And from there, the projectile flies the farthest because height adds range. A torsion mechanism made of twisted ropes. 20 turns. Each turn was pulled tight to the limit. Daniel checked the tension by hand. The system lit up green when the tension was correct. The first test shot. A stone the size of 2 fists. The lever was pulled back. The trigger mechanism released. The lever struck the crossbar. The stone shot into the sky. Daniel watched it with his eyes. The stone fell into the water 120 meters from the cliff. Not enough. He needed 200. He tightened the ropes, added 2 turns, raised the frame's angle by 3 degrees. Second shot, 180 meters. Better. Third shot after another adjustment, 210 meters. Enough. The system flashed. Rock ballista, level 1, complete. Accuracy bonus plus 10%. 10% accuracy. That means that out of 10 shots, 1 extra will hit the target. At a distance of 200 meters against a moving ship, that's significant. He placed the second ballista on the western cliff, the third at the southern end of the spit. 3 weeks for each. By the end of the 11th month, 3 ballistas stood in a triangle around the bay. Daniel drew the strike zones on the map. 3 circles. They overlapped. Almost the entire bay was covered. The entire entrance channel. 2 blind spots, small ones, behind the rocks. A ship couldn't get through there. The ballistas were camouflaged, stone walls all around, canopies made of seaweed and branches. They couldn't be seen from the sea, visible only when they fired. Bran looked at the positions. He shook his head and said that in 20 years at sea, he'd taken 2 ports, and both were less well defended. Daniel replied that those 2 ports probably weren't designed by logisticians. Bran didn't smile. He was starting to get used to the fact that Daniel joked with a straight face, and you could only tell if it was a joke or not after a minute. The 11th month. The lighthouse. The system had provided the blueprints as early as the 6th month, but back then they were inaccessible. There wasn't enough manpower or materials. Now there was. A lighthouse on the northern cliff, near the first ballista but higher up, right at the very top. A stone tower, 10 meters tall, circular in cross-section, walls a meter thick at the base, tapered toward the top. A platform at the top, a lens made of volcanic glass. Daniel didn't understand this part. Volcanic glass. Obsidian. He knew that obsidian could be polished to a very smooth surface, but a lens made of obsidian. That's not standard optics. The system showed a diagram of the lens. Double convex, 40 centimeters in diameter, 8 centimeters thick at the center. The surface polished to a mirror finish. When placed in front of an oil lamp, the lens concentrates the light into a narrow beam visible 30 miles away. 30 miles. No lighthouse on the continent shines farther than 10. This was the first thing the system proposed, and which Daniel could not explain with normal physics. An obsidian lens with such characteristics. This isn't a 15% bonus. This is technology. Technology that doesn't exist in this world, and that shouldn't exist. He thought about this while building the tower, stone by stone. 20 people worked, carrying, passing, masonry on clay mixed with ash. Slowly, hardly, dangerously. At a height of 6 meters, one of the workers slipped. Seda treated his arm until morning. A fracture. Clean, but a fracture. The tower was completed in 5 weeks. Mei Lin made the lens. She had never worked with obsidian, but the system gave her the blueprint through Daniel, and Mei Lin spent 3 days polishing a piece of volcanic glass brought by Bran from the southern islands. 3 days without a break. Her hands were raw, her eyes were red from dust. But the lens was finished. Daniel installed it in the frame at the top of the lighthouse, an oil lamp behind the lens. Evening. He lit the lamp. The light passed through the lens and struck the darkness over the sea. Bright, narrow, white. From the pier below, people gasped. Bran stood by the water and looked up. The pillar of light stretched into the night, visible, distant, like a stake pointing to the sky. Right here. Here is the port. Here is safety. The system flashed. Lighthouse, level 1, complete. Navigation bonus plus 20% for ships within the radius of visibility. This meant that ships heading toward the lighthouse's light stayed on course a little more accurately, found the fairway a little more easily, missed the entrance to the bay a little less often. 20%. For a captain in a storm at night, 20% in navigation is a matter of life or death. That night, Daniel climbed to the top of the lighthouse for the first time and looked down. The island lay beneath him, lit by lights, bonfires by the tavern, a fire in Mei Lin's smithy, a light in the window of Sada's infirmary, a lantern at the pier, paths between the buildings, movement, life. A year ago, there was a rock here, a dead rock. Now people live here. The lighthouse needed a keeper, a man who would tend the fire, clean the lens, watch over the lamp, every night, without fail. Daniel knew who to ask. Young Yuna. Young Yuna, 17 years old. She had arrived on the island 3 weeks ago on a merchant ship that had come in for salt. Daniel didn't know she was on board until Yuna the Elder approached him and told him there was a slave among the crew, a rowing slave from a galley, sold to the captain to pay off debts. She works on deck. She sleeps in the hold. She doesn't speak. Daniel asked how much it would cost to buy out her contract. Yuna the Elder said the contract was worth 20 silver pieces, or in goods. Daniel went to the captain. He offered 2 barrels of salt, 300 pounds. On the mainland, that's 600 silver, more than his entire crew was worth. The captain agreed instantly. Younger Yuna went ashore. She stood on the pier. She didn't move. She didn't look at anyone. Small, thin. Her hair was cut short, rope marks on her wrists, scars on her back that Daniel saw later when Seda examined her in the infirmary. Daniel didn't approach her, didn't speak to her, didn't touch her. He asked Seda to take care for her, to feed her, to give her clothes, to give her a place in the infirmary, not to ask her anything. Yuna Jr. remained silent for 2 weeks. She ate, she slept. Sometimes she stood by the water and looked out at the sea. Sometimes she flinched when someone walked past too quickly. Once, Bran accidentally slammed the door, and she fell to the floor and covered her head with her hands. Bran stood in the doorway, white as a sheet. Then he left silently. He sat on the pier for 20 minutes, staring at the water. Then he stood up and told Daniel that if he ever found the one who did this to her, he would kill him. Daniel didn't say anything. At the end of the 2nd week, he approached Yuna Jr. She was standing by the water. He stopped 3 steps away, no closer. He said he had a job. Quiet, lonely, at the lighthouse. Needed to clean the lens, keep the fire going, watch the sea. Alone. Up top. Silence. Wind. Sea. No one around. Younger Yuna looked at him. For the first time in 2 weeks, she looked him in the eye. Then she nodded. The next day, she climbed up to the lighthouse. Daniel showed her how the lamp worked, how to clean the lens, how to change the oil, how to signal if she sees a ship. Then he left. Younger Yuna stayed up there, alone, with the wind and the sea and the stars. Silence. True silence. Not the hold. Not the deck. No shouts. No blows. Silence. 3 days later, Daniel came up to check on her. The lens was clean. The lamp burned steadily. There was exactly the right amount of oil. Younger Yuna sat by the window and looked out at the sea. She didn't flinch when he entered. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. She was waiting. That was good. She was beginning to distinguish sounds she didn't need to be afraid of. He asked if everything was all right. He left. The following week he began building. Not on the lighthouse. Next to the lighthouse. A small house, made of stone. 1 room, a window facing the sea, a door with a lock that locks from the inside. 1 key. He gave the key to younger Yuna. She held it in her palms and looked at it. A small iron key. Mei Lin had forged it specially, at Daniel's request. One key, one lock, one door that no one can open without her permission. Younger Yuna entered the house, closed the door, turned the key. The click of the lock. Daniel stood outside on the porch. He heard her sit down on the floor through the door. Then silence. Then a soft sound. Crying. Not screaming, not sobbing, the quiet crying of a person who, for the first time in a very long time, feels safe. Daniel sat down on the porch. He didn't leave. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just sat there. An hour later, the door opened. Younger Yuna stood in the doorway. Her eyes were red. Her face was wet. She looked at Daniel. He was sitting on the porch, looking out at the sea. She sat down next to him, silently. They sat side by side and said nothing. Then she said the first word he'd heard from her. "Thank you." One word. Quiet. Hoarse. Daniel nodded. He didn't turn his head. He didn't look. He didn't want her to see his face. Because on his face was something he didn't want to show. Anger. Not at her, at the world that had done this to her, at the people who had bound her hands, at the system in which a 17-year-old girl could be sold for 20 pieces of silver. The anger of an engineer who sees a breakdown that shouldn't have happened. The 12th month. A year. A full year on the island. Daniel stood on the lighthouse and counted. 82 people. 2 piers. The shipyard. The infirmary. The smithy. A tavern. 36 salt pans. 1,000 pounds of salt a month. Warehouse Street. 3 ballistas. A lighthouse with a lens visible 30 miles away. A vegetable garden with turnips and onions and cabbage. Fish traps, smokehouses, drying sheds, houses for the residents. A registry listing every ship and every cargo. A smithy where standard spare parts lie on the shelves. Greystone Port. A real port. Alive, working, growing. He stood and looked down. Morning. The sun was rising. 2 ships in the bay, a third at the pier. At the pier, Yuna the Elder with a birch bark scroll, the sound of a hammer in the smithy, a light in the infirmary, people on the paths. His people. Not subjects, not slaves, not soldiers. People who came because they had nowhere else to go, and stayed because here they could work and live and not be afraid. Then he looked at the horizon. Empty. But not forever. Duke Valsin would sooner or later find out that Dan Corvish was alive, that the boy who had been exiled to die on a barren rock had built a port through which all more trade passes through. And then it won't be merchant ships that come. It will be warships. Daniel knew this. He counted on it. He prepared for it. 3 ballistas, crossfire, camouflaged positions. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough against a serious fleet. He needed more. More people, more ships, more allies. Or at least more reasons why it would be more profitable to leave him alone than to destroy him. He climbed down from the lighthouse. He walked past younger Yuna's house. The door was closed. A light was on inside. She's safe. He walked past the smithy. Mei Lin was already at work. The hammer's rhythm was steady as a metronome. He walked past the infirmary. Sarah was washing instruments at the entrance. She looked up. She nodded. He nodded back. He walked to the pier. Yuna the Elder stood at the registry. A new ship was entering the bay. She was already writing down the name. Bran was on the deck of his cog, checking the rigging. A second ship at the second pier was being unloaded. Sacks, barrels. The first assassin arrived 3 weeks after the anniversary. He claimed to be a merchant from Carven. He had sailed in on a merchant ship. He was carrying cloth and spices. Yuna the Elder recorded him in the register. Name, ship, cargo, everything as usual. He was polite, quiet. He smiled often. He paid without haggling. He asked for a room at the tavern, 3 nights. He wanted to rest before the return voyage. Daniel caught a glimpse of him on the first day. Didn't pay any attention, just another merchant, the kind who comes in 3 times a week. On the second day, the merchant asked the tavern keeper where he could find the island's owner. He said he wanted to discuss a large order for salt. The keeper pointed to salt. The merchant went. Not right away. First he walked around the island. He looked at the pools, the warehouse, the shipyard, the smithy. He wandered around. He was taking a good look around. Younger Yuna was the first to notice him. She didn't come down from the lighthouse unless she had to. But that day she came down for oil for the lamp and saw the merchant by the smithy. He was standing there, looking at Mei Lin. But not the way people usually look at a blacksmith at work. He was looking at the layout of the buildings, at the distances between them, at the paths, at where people stood. Younger Yuna grew up on the galley. On the galley, those who notice things before others survive. Those who watch where the overseer has placed his whip. Those who count the steps between themselves and the door. She saw how this man was looking. He is not a merchant. A merchant looks at the goods. This man is looking at his target. She went to Seda, not to Daniel, to Seda, because she trusted Seda. Seda listened, quietly. Then she asked what exactly younger Yuna had noticed. Younger Yuna said that the merchant was touching the pouch on his belt too often. Not a wallet, another pouch, a small one, tied to the belt from the inside, so it was almost invisible from the outside. Seda turned pale. She knew what they kept in such pouches. She had spent 2 years at the Temple of the Bright Hand. The temple traded in medicines. And medicines and poisons are one and the same. The only difference is in the dosage. Seda went to Daniel. She found him by the salt pools. He was checking the water level in the cascade. She said one word: poisoner. Daniel's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He straightened up. He looked at Seda. He asked if she was sure. Seda said that Yuna Jr. had noticed the pouch and that she knew what the temple's ritual poisons looked like. She wasn't sure, but she wanted to check. Daniel nodded. He asked how to check. Seda said she needed access to his belongings, or to his food, or to him personally. If she caught a whiff, she'd know. Daniel invited the merchant to dinner, privately. He went to the tavern and told him he'd heard about a large order for salt and wanted to discuss it over dinner. The merchant smiled. Of course, with pleasure. Dinner at the tavern, fish, porridge, beer. Daniel and the merchant at one table, Sarah at the next, pretending to be dining alone. The merchant talked about salt prices in Carven, about roots, about the war, small talk. Then he proposed a toast to their partnership. He pulled a bottle of wine from his bag. He said he'd brought it from the continent. Good wine, southern. He poured some for Daniel. He poured some for himself. Daniel raised his mug, brought it to his lips. And at that moment, Sarah rose from her table. She approached. She took the mug from Daniel's hands, silently. She sniffed it for a long time. Then she set the mug down on the table. She looked at the merchant. The merchant wasn't smiling. His face was blank, like a mask that had been removed. Sarah said there was nightshade root in the wine. 3 drops of the tincture. Death in 6 hours. Looks like a heart attack. Undetectable without knowledge, without a scent. almost scentless. But Sira had ground this root in a mortar for temple ointments for 2 years. She knew its scent as well as she knew the scent of her own hands. The merchant moved, quickly. A knife from behind his belt. Not a merchant's knife, a combat knife. Short, thin, for a single strike. Bran was faster. He was sitting 2 tables away, watching. Daniel had asked him to keep watch even before dinner. Bran grabbed the hand holding the knife, twisted it. The merchant fell face first onto the table. Bran held him with one hand and looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the bottle of wine, then at Sira, then at the merchant. He asked who had sent him. The merchant was silent. Bran pressed harder. The merchant remained silent. Daniel told Bran to let go. Bran looked at him as if he were crazy. Daniel repeated it. Let go. Bran let go. The merchant stood up. He rubbed his wrist. He looked at Daniel. Daniel said he didn't need to know the name. He already knew it. Duke Valson, the only man who stands to gain from Dan Corvish's death. The merchant didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. Daniel said the merchant would leave tomorrow morning, on his own ship, alive, with a message for the Duke. The message is simple. Dan Corvus is alive. Greystone stands. If the Duke wants negotiations, he knows where to find him. If he wants war, he knows that too. The merchant left in the morning, without wine, without a knife. Bran took the knife, a fine knife. The steel was better than anywhere on the island. Mei Lin looked at the knife and said that steel like this was forged in only 3 workshops on the continent, all 3 in the capital of the Eastern Crown, Valsam territory. Daniel stood on the pier and watched as the ship sailed out of sight. Sera stood nearby. She said he had made a mistake. They should have interrogated him, found out the plan, found out the route. Daniel said he knew the plan. The plan was simple. Kill. The route was simple too. Valson had sent for him. The merchant had arrived. The information an interrogation might yield wasn't worth what he'd gain by letting him go alive. And alive, he'd gain more. Sera asked what exactly. Daniel answered. Time. The merchant will return to Valson. He'll tell him he failed. He'll tell him about the island. He doesn't know about the ballistas. He knows about the population. He knows about the port. Valson will think, calculate, plan. That will take time, months, and months are a resource, the most valuable resource. Sera looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was thinking like a merchant, not a warrior. Daniel replied that that was exactly why he was still alive. After the assassination attempt, the island had changed. Not physically, internally. People had found out. Not everything, not about the poison, but about the fact that a stranger with bad intentions had come and that he'd been driven out. The rumor spread in a day. By evening, everyone had gathered at the tavern. Not by order, on their own. 82 people. They stood. They looked at Daniel. They waited. He didn't want to speak. He never wanted to speak. He wanted to draw, to count, to build. But 82 people stood and waited. He spoke briefly. There are enemies on the island. On the mainland, there are people who don't want Greystone to exist. They'll send more. Not just one. More. So from this day forward, every new person on the island must go through Elder Yuna's registry. Everyone. No exceptions. Whoever doesn't pass won't set foot on shore. Elder Yuna nodded. She'd already been doing this. But now it has become a rule. A law. The first law of Greystone. Second. Night watch. 4 people. In shifts. Patrol the island every 2 hours. Bran has assigned the people. Third. Ballistas. Until now, they were manned on an ad hoc basis. Now, each has a permanent crew. 3 people. Trained. Ready. The people listened. They didn't argue. They didn't protest. They had come to this island because there was nowhere else to go. They had stayed because it had become possible to live here. And they weren't about to lose that. For the next 2 months, Daniel built and prepared at the same time, expanding the cascade to 42 basins, a salt output of 1,500 pounds a month, a new warehouse, twice the size of the first, expansion of the shipyard, now 2 slipways, 2 ships under repair at the same time, and in parallel, training for the ballista crews, every day, in the morning, for an hour. Loading, aiming, firing. The stones flew into the sea. Splashes. Daniel timed the range and accuracy. He adjusted the angles. He took notes. After a month, the crews worked like a well-oiled machine. Loading, 20 seconds. Aiming, 10. Fire. Reload. Cycle. 4 shots per minute from each position. 12 stones per minute from 3 positions. Each stone weighed 10 kilograms. At a distance of 200 meters, such a stone would pierce the side of a cog. At 100 meters, it would snap the mast. Bran looked at the calculations and said that 3 pirate ships wouldn't get through. 5 wouldn't get through either. 10 would get through, but lose half their number. Daniel nodded. 10 ships is already a serious squadron. The pirates won't be able to muster that many. So the pirates aren't a threat. The threat is the state, Duke Valson, or the Salt League, or both together. We need something else against them. Not stones. Politics. The 13th month. Kaelin Valson, the Duke's niece, 19 years old. The ship carrying her to the Northern Kingdom for a political marriage ran into a storm, lost its mast, drifted for 2 days, spotted the Greystone lighthouse, made it. Kaelin went ashore in a dress worth more than the entire island, wet, torn, but expensive. Una the Elder looked at the dress, then at Daniel. Then she recorded it in the register. Name, Kaelin Valson. Vessel, the Swan. Captain, Lord Wren. Status, passenger. Of noble birth. Daniel read the entry and froze. Valson. Una the Elder said quietly, "Yes." Valson. Daniel walked toward the pier. Kaelin stood on the shore, surrounded by 2 maids and 1 bodyguard. The bodyguard kept his hand on his sword. Kaelin looked at the island, at the rocks, at the buildings, at the people, at the pier, with an expression Daniel hadn't expected. Not contempt, not fear. Curiosity. She looked at the workers walking toward the warehouse, at Mei Lin by the smithy, at Una the Elder with the register, and she saw something that surprised her. Daniel approached, introduced himself. The island's owner, Dan Corvus. Kaelin looked at him. She knew that name, of course she did. Her uncle had exiled him. She had been at that council. She was 17 then. She remembered the boy who had asked about supply logistics and whom her uncle had sent to a deserted island to reflect on his behavior. The boy was supposed to die. The boy didn't die. She was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said she was glad to see him alive. Her voice was steady, without irony, without fear, just a statement of a fact. Daniel replied that he was glad she had made it, also without irony. The ship Kaelin needed serious repairs. The mast, the rudder, the hull plating. A week's work at least. A week during which the niece of Daniel's chief enemy would be living on his island. Bran said it was a trap. Daniel said it was an opportunity. Bran asked, "An opportunity for what?" Daniel said, "For information." Kaelin spent 6 days on the island. On the first day, she walked around. She looked. She was silent. On the second day, she asked questions. Smart questions. How the accounting works, how many ships come in, what the turnover is, how the cascade works, who makes the decisions. Daniel answered, not everything, but most of it, because the answers were obvious to anyone who was paying close attention. And Kaylin was watching very closely. On the third day, she went to Daniel and said she didn't want to go back. She didn't want to go to the Northern Kingdom. She didn't want a political marriage. She didn't want to be a pawn. Daniel listened. Kaylin said she could pay for him to let her stay. Not with money. She had no money. With knowledge. She knows everything about her uncle's court. What he loves, who he fears, what debts he has, what alliances, what weaknesses. She asked if that was currency. Daniel looked at her for a long time. 19 years old. Thin. Her wet hair had dried and turned out to be chestnut brown. Gray eyes. Intelligent. Cold. Not from cruelty. From the habit of not showing what she feels. He said it was very valuable currency. Kaylin stayed. The ship left without her. The captain argued. The bodyguard argued. Kaylin said one sentence that silenced them both. She said that if they delivered her to the Northern Kingdom alive, she would be dead within a year, poisoned at a wedding, just like the heir to the Eastern Crown 2 years ago. Because political marriages in this world aren't alliances. They're executions in installments. The captain and the bodyguard left, in silence. Kaylin stood on the pier and watched her ship sail away. Then she turned to Daniel and asked where she would live. Daniel pointed to the tavern. Temporarily, until he builds her a room. Kaylin said she didn't need a room. She needed a job. Daniel asked what she could do. Kaylin said she could read people, tell lies from the truth, count money, write letters that say one thing but mean another. And she knows all the important people on the continent, either personally or by description. Daniel nodded. He said he needed a diplomat, someone who would meet important guests, conduct negotiations, write replies to messages. Because Daniel knows how to build ports, but doesn't know how to talk to dukes. For the first time ever, Kaylin smiled. A small smile. She said she could do it. She had been talking to dukes since she was 12. The next day, Daniel and Kaylin sat in his hut until late into the night. Kaylin told him about the court of Valsen, about its generals, about the treasury, about allies and enemies, about the Salt League and its leaders, about the Northern Kingdom and its interests, about secret treaties and open threats. Daniel listened and wrote it all down on birch bark. By morning, he had a map. Not a geographical one, a political one. Who's with whom, who's against whom, who fears what, who wants what. He looked at this map and saw the same thing he saw when he looked at the port. Flows, not of cargo, power, money, fear, and points of intersection, points where a hub could be built. Greystone stood at such a point, physically, between routes. Now he had to position himself at such a point politically, between interests, between fears, to become a place that everyone needs and that no one can be allowed to take away. Winter of the first year came without warning. The temperature dropped over the course of a week. The wind from the north brought cold and rain. The sea darkened. The waves grew higher. Ships came in less often, 3 a week instead of 7. Daniel had foreseen this. 3 months' worth of grain, salted fish for 2, 4,000 pounds of salt in the warehouse, enough to survive the winter and trade in the spring when prices rise. But winter brought more than just cold. It brought an inspection. A small galleass flying the flag of the Salt League entered the bay in the first week of winter. Narrow, fast, military in design but without guns. A diplomatic vessel. On deck, a man in furs, furs that cost more than the island's entire monthly catch. Yuna the Elder recorded it in the register. Vessel, Silverblade. Captain, Lord Irwin Tass, representative of the Salt League. Purpose of visit, inspection. Daniel met him in person, at the pier, in work clothes, dirty, with salt stains on his sleeves. He hadn't changed. He didn't bother. Kaylin stood behind him, clean, in clothes she had altered from a ship's dress. Calm. She had warned him the day before. She saw the flag from the lighthouse and said the League wouldn't send a soldier. The League would send an accountant. Because the League doesn't fight wars. The League calculates. Lord Tass stepped ashore. He looked around. His face betrayed nothing. A professional face. The face of a man who has spent 20 years appraising other people's property and never shows what he's thinking. He said he had arrived on behalf of the Salt League Council to verify rumors of illegal salt production in neutral waters. Daniel replied that he welcomed the inspection, that he would show him everything, and that the word illegal surprised him because there was no law prohibiting the evaporation of seawater on one's own island. Tass didn't argue. He said, "Show me." Daniel led him around the island, personally, for 2 hours, without rushing. They started with the cascade, 42 basins, 4 levels, each level with increasing concentration. The upper basins were murky, the middle ones were translucent, the lower ones had a white crust. Tass watched in silence. Then he asked about the output. Daniel replied, 1,500 pounds a month, 2,000 in the summer, 1,000 in the winter. Tass showed no reaction, but Daniel saw his fingers twitch. 1,500 pounds. That's the output of an average salt mine. A mine costs 200,000 silver, requires 100 workers, prone to cave-ins. It needs caravan protection. Instead of a mine, Daniel has 42 stone basins in the sun. Next, the sorting shed. A canopy by the cascade. 3 tables. Scales on each. Simple. Lever type. Made by Mei Lin. The salt is sorted by quality. Coarse, medium, fine. Each grade goes into separate barrels. The barrels are standard. 1 size, 1 volume. Each is numbered. On each is the date of evaporation, weight, grade, the name of the worker who packed it. Tass stopped by the barrels. He looked at the labels. For a long time. Then he looked at Daniel. For the first time in 2 hours, his face showed something. Not admiration, not anger, understanding. He realized he wasn't dealing with a small-time operator. He was facing a system. A warehouse, stone walls, dry, clean, barrels on shelves. The shelves were numbered, a ledger on the wall, a birch bark scroll. Incoming, outgoing, balance, every day. Tass looked at the ledger for a minute. Then he asked who kept the records. Daniel pointed to Yuna the Elder standing at the entrance. Tass looked at her, a young woman, a stern gaze, straight back. He asked where she was from. Yuna the Elder replied that it had nothing to do with the inspection. Tass said nothing. The shipyard. 2 slipways. 1 is occupied. A merchant cog is under repair. The hull is open. 2 workers are replacing the planking. Standard planks in 3 sizes on a rack. Standard clamps in 4 sizes on a shelf. Standard fasteners. Tass stopped. He looked at the shelf with the staples, then at Daniel. He asked where he'd learned this. Daniel replied that it was common sense. Tass said that in 40 years of his trading career, he'd never seen so much common sense in one place. The smithy. Mei Lin was working. She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. The sound of a hammer. Sparks. Tass watched her. the bellows, the anvil, the rows of finished products on the wall. Staples, hinges, nails, hooks, chains, all the same, all standard, he asked quietly. And that was her, too. Daniel replied that it was Mei Lin, the best blacksmith for 100 miles. Tass didn't argue. The infirmary. Sira came out to meet him, a white apron, clean hands, a calm face. Tass went inside. He looked at the beds, at the shelves with medicines, at the instruments, at the window, at the absence of symbols. He left in silence. The lighthouse. Tass climbed to the top. He looked at the lens, for a long time. Then down at the island, at the port, which from the height of the lighthouse looked like a small town. The docks, the warehouses, the paths, the smoke, the people. He went down. He stood on the dock. He was silent. Daniel waited. Tass said that his master would offer Daniel the post of Chief Salt Quartermaster of the League. Daniel replied that he would convey the following to Master Tass. He already holds that position, and that half the barrels the League sells in the Eastern Crown are his. They just bear the League's mark, because the middlemen in Carven buy from him at 3 silver per pound and sell to the League for 5, marking them as their own goods. If Master Tass wants to negotiate royalties, Daniel is open to it. Tass was silent. 10 seconds. 20. Then he said he would pass it on, and he left. The Galeas weighed anchor an hour later. Kaylin stood next to Daniel on the pier and watched the ship sail away. She said that Daniel had just declared war on the richest trading organization on the continent. Daniel replied that he hadn't. He had set a price. Those are two different things. A week later, a letter arrived from the continent, on parchment, with the League's seal. The Council of the Salt League invited a representative from Greystone Island to negotiations in the port of Vesmar. In a month. Daniel showed the letter to Kaylin. Kaylin read it. Then again. Then she said it wasn't an invitation. It's a test. If he comes, it means he needs their approval. If he doesn't come, it means he's afraid. Both options are disadvantageous to him. Daniel said there was a third option. Kaylin raised an eyebrow. Daniel said he wouldn't send himself. He would send her. Kaylin froze. The niece of Duke Valson, to negotiate with the Salt League, on behalf of the island the Duke wants to destroy. Daniel explained. When the League sees Valson at the negotiating table, they'll understand 3 things. First, the Greystone has ties to the Eastern Crown, even if not the ones the League thinks. Second, Daniel is so confident that he's sending a noblewoman instead of coming in person. Third, Daniel has inside information from Valson's court, which means he has information about the League, too. Kaylin listened. Then she nodded slowly. She said it was either genius or suicidal. Daniel said that in his experience, those 2 words often describe the same thing. Kaylin left for negotiations on a merchant ship 2 weeks later. With her were Bran, 3 armed sailors, and a birch bark scroll with Greystone's position, written by Daniel. The position was simple. Greystone does not join the League. Greystone does not compete with the League. Greystone complements the League. The League controls salt from the land. Greystone controls salt from the sea. 2 sources, 2 markets. Not conflict, but division. The price per pound of sea salt is set at no less than the continental price minus 10%. The League receives the right to duty-free entry into the port of Greystone. In return, the League recognizes the island's neutrality and does not support military action against it. Kaylin returned 3 weeks later with an answer. The League did not agree. But it did not refuse either. The League proposed a counter-proposal. A blockade, a ban on its captains entering Greystone, Economic strangulation. No war, no ships, just turning off the tap. Daniel read the reply. He looked at Kalen. Kalen said the blockade was a formality. The League couldn't control every captain. Independent traders didn't answer to the League, smugglers even less so. The blockade would last a month, maybe 2. Then it would fall apart. Because Greystone is too convenient. The only shipyard in the region, the only neutral port, the only place where a captain can get standard spare parts in an hour instead of a week. The League knows this. The blockade is a gesture, to show who's in charge. Daniel nodded. He understood. The blockade lasted 26 days. On the 27th, the League's first captain entered the bay under a foreign flag. 3 days later, the second. A week later, the fourth arrived already under the League's flag. No disguise, out in the open. Because his ship was taking on water, and he would either get it repaired here or sink in a day. The blockade collapsed. Not with a scandal, not with a fight. Quietly. Like a fence that had rotted and fallen on its own. 2 months after the blockade began, the League officially addressed Greystone as an equal trading partner. A letter on parchment, with a seal, with an offer of the very terms that Daniel had proposed from the start. Price fixing. Unrestricted. The spring of the second year began with a ship. Not a merchant ship, not a warship, a pirate ship. 3 ships flying the Black Eyes flag entered the lighthouse's line of sight at dawn. Una Jr. was the first to spot them. She sent the signal. A red flag at the top of the lighthouse. 3 times. 3 ships. Daniel was on his feet in a minute. Bran in 2. The ballista crews in 3. The whole island in 5. Over 90 people. Women and children to the hidden caves on the western side. Men to their positions. Daniel climbed the lighthouse. You can see everything from there. 3 ships, 2 medium-sized cogs, 1 large one. The flagship. The Black Eye on the sail. The pirate brotherhood that had been terrorizing the southern waters for the past 5 years. They were sailing in formation, the flagship in the center, 2 cogs on either side, straight for the bay. Daniel watched and calculated. Distance, speed, wind, approach angle. They would enter the firing range in 20 minutes. Ballistas in position, camouflaged, invisible from the sea. The pirates don't know about them. They see a small port on the cliff, a tavern, warehouses, the pier. Easy prey. Daniel waited. 15 minutes. 10. 5. The lead cog entered the firing range of the northern ballista. 180 meters. Daniel raised the flag. Yellow. Signal. Ready. 200 meters. 150. 120. Red flag. Volley. 3 ballistas fired simultaneously. 12 stones in the first 3 seconds. The lead cog took 4 hits. 2 in the side, 1 in the deck, 1 at the base of the mast. The mast cracked. The cog lurched, lost speed. The second cog behind it took 2 hits. 1 in the bow, 1 below the waterline. Water poured in. Reload. 20 seconds. Second volley. 12 more stones. The first cog took 3 more. The hull was breached. It began to list. Water flooded the lower deck. Pirates on deck scrambled about. They didn't expect it. They weren't ready. They had gone to raid a fishing village and came under crossfire from 3 concealed positions. Third volley. The first cog was sinking. Slowly. Listing to starboard. The deck was going under. People were jumping into the sea. The second cog was on fire. A stone had hit a barrel of tar on deck. The fire spread through the wood. Smoke. Screams. The flagship. A large ship. The captain on the bridge. He saw what was happening. 2 of his ships destroyed in 2 minutes. He didn't know where the stones were coming from. The positions were camouflaged. Stones were flying from 3 sides at once, as if the island itself were firing. The flagship began to turn. Slowly. A large ship. Heavy. Sluggish. Daniel raised a blue flag, a signal for Bran. Bran stood on his cog at the pier, waiting. The blue flag meant an exit. Bran's cog left the bay, quickly, light, maneuverable. 10 men on board, armed. Bran went to intercept. The flagship was still turning when Bran's cog rammed its stern. The pirates didn't expect an attack. They were retreating. They were fleeing. And suddenly, a ship emerged from the port they were about to raid and came up behind them. Bran didn't attack. He closed within and shouted that the flagship could leave. Or it could stay. If it left, the ballistas would cease fire. If he stayed, he would get the same treatment as the 2 cogs. The flagship stopped. Movement on deck. Shouts. Arguments. Then a white flag was lowered from the bridge. A rag on a pole. Surrender. Daniel climbed down from the lighthouse. He walked to the pier. Bran led the flagship into the bay. 42 on board, unarmed, wet, angry, frightened. The pirate captain stepped onto the pier, tall, shaven, a scar across his entire face. He looked down at Daniel. Daniel looked at him. Then he said the captain had 2 options. First, he and his crew would be put out in rowboats on the open sea, unarmed, no water, no food, as is customary with defeated pirates. Second, he and the crew stay. The ship is confiscated, but the pirates are offered work, legal, paid, at the shipyard, in the warehouses, on convoys. Anyone who wants to stay at sea gets a place on the Greystone's merchant ships, under a new flag, no piracy. The captain looked at Daniel, then at the island, at the docks, at the warehouses, at the people, at the ballistas that were now visible, stone walls, levers, sling stones. He had just lost 2 ships and 40 men, killed, drowned, burned, because he didn't know the rock could shoot. He asked what the pay was. Daniel named a figure. The captain nodded. Bran negotiated the details. Who goes where? Who to the shipyard? Who to the convoys? Who to the warehouse? 26 of the 42 pirates remained. 16 left in rowboats. Their choice. The flagship. A large ship. 30 meters. 24 oars. 2 sails. Gun ports on board. Empty. The pirates didn't use cannons. Too expensive. But the ports were there. Daniel stood on the deck and looked. The ship needed repairs. 2 weeks, maybe 3. But after repairs, it would be the strongest ship in the harbor. Greystone's first warship. Mei Lin climbed aboard. She looked at the fastenings, at the plating, at the rigging. Then she looked at Daniel and said the ship was good, that she could do what was needed for him. Daniel asked what exactly. Mei Lin said she could forge. Weapons. Not staples or nails. Real weapons. Arrowheads, boarding hooks, metal plates to reinforce the sides. Daniel looked at her. She waited. She knew he didn't want weapons. He was a builder, not a warrior. But she also knew that the world doesn't ask what you want. The world asks what you can't afford to lose. Daniel said, "Go ahead." After the battle, the island changed again. Not the walls, not the buildings, the people. They had won, for the first time. A small port on a cliff had destroyed a pirate squadron in 4 minutes. 13 pirates killed, 2 ships sunk, 1 captured. Greystone suffered no losses. 0. because the ballistas fired from a distance, because the pirates didn't even make it to shore, because Daniel had spent 6 months designing the defenses, and they worked. People walked around the island with different expressions on their faces, with straight backs. They were no longer refugees, not vagabonds, not losers. They residents of a port that can defend itself. In the evening, the tavern was noisy. Beer, fish, conversation, laughter. For the first time in a year, laughter rang out on the island. Not quiet, loud. Daniel sat in the corner and watched. Bran was telling the sailors how the flagship had raised the white flag. Mei Lin was beer with the former pirates and argued about the quality of their swords' steel. Yuna the elder stood by the door and counted the people, out of habit. Sarah sat by the wall and looked at Daniel. She was the only one who saw that he wasn't happy. She walked over, sat down next to him, asked what was wrong. Daniel said that 13 people had died, drowned, burned, pirates, bandits, people who came to plunder and kill. But 13 people. Sarah was silent. Then she said that she had spent 2 years healing people at the temple, and that every time someone died, she felt the same way. Even when it was a bad person, even when it was a man who beat his wife and abused his children. Because death is death, and whoever stops feeling that stops being a doctor. She said that Daniel wouldn't stop feeling that, because he builds, not destroys. And a builder who doesn't feel the weight of what is being destroyed stops building properly. Daniel looked at her. She was sitting next to him, quiet, calm, hands on her knees, hands that healed, hands that just yesterday morning were still washing instruments in clean water at the entrance to the infirmary. He said thank you. She nodded, stood up, went into the infirmary, because she had 2 wounded patients, former pirates, with burns. She treated them, without asking under what flag they had sailed yesterday. The second summer brought growth. The population had surpassed 120. Ships arrived every day. The 2 docks couldn't handle the traffic. Daniel built a 3rd, then a 4th. The cascade was expanded to 50 basins. Salt output was 3,000 pounds a month. Mei Lin took on an apprentice, then a second. The smithy worked 2 shifts. The shipyard was expanded to 3 slipways. Bran no longer sailed the voyages himself. He had 3 captains, 3 merchant cogs flying the gray stone flag, a gray triangle on a white background. Kalen came up with it. Simple, recognizable. The 4th ship is a warship, a former pirate flagship, renamed the Grey Wedge, armed. Mei Lin forged 6 boarding hooks and 24 javelins for it. The sides were reinforced with iron plates. The first convoy set sail in early summer. The Grey Wedge escorted 3 merchant ships from Greystone to the port of Li San, a 2-day journey. No incidents. The pirates saw the warship and fled. Rumors of what had happened to the Black Eye reached every port. 3 ships in 4 minutes. Convoys became a service, a paid one. Captains paid with salt or goods for protection along the route. Greystone became more than just a port. It became a guarantor, a place from which one could set out and arrive alive, with cargo, without losses. Eileen's Sorrow appeared in the middle of summer, on a merchant ship from Vesmar. She was hired as a translator for the northern dialect. The captain was carrying a cargo of wool from the northern provinces and didn't understand a word the suppliers were saying to him. Eileen translated. Quiet, distracted. She forgot people's names, but remembered the coordinates of every cape they passed. She went ashore, and the first thing she did was ask to see a map of the island. Not a typical request for an interpreter. Una the elder showed her the birch bark map of the bay that Daniel had drawn during his first month. Eileen looked at it for 30 seconds. Then she said that the depths near the northern reef were inaccurate, by half a meter. Una the elder looked at her, then at the map, then at Eileen. She asked how she knew. Eileen said she had seen the color of the water as they entered. A turquoise hue near the reef meant 4 meters, not 4.5. Una the elder silently went to find Daniel. Daniel came. He looked at Eileen. Small, slender. Her hair was a mess, ink stains on her fingers and wrists, and on her neck. She used to draw on herself when there was no paper. He asked what she did besides translating. Eileen hesitated. Then she said quietly that she was a cartographer. Daniel asked to see the maps. Eileen hesitated. Then she took some rolled-up sheets out of her bag. She unfolded them on the pier. Daniel froze. The maps were incredible. Detailed, precise, not copies, originals. The coastline was drawn with precision down to the coves. Currents were marked with arrows and notes on seasonal changes. Depths, reefs, wind corridors, every cape, every island, every strait. Daniel stared at them for 10 minutes. He didn't speak. He just stared. Then he looked up at Eileen. She was standing there, waiting for him to say what everyone else had said, that a woman couldn't be a cartographer, that no one needed her crazy father's maps, that it was a frivolity. He said he'd pay her 3 times what she earned from translation, and that she would finish the map of the inner sea's currents, and that he would build her an observatory. Eileen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She asked if he was serious. Daniel said he was an engineer. He's always serious. Eileen asked why he needed a current map. Daniel explained. Right now, every captain sails his own route, at random, from memory, out of habit, wasting time, wasting fuel, taking risks. If there were an accurate current map, the routes could be optimized. Cut travel time by 20%, 30%, and whoever owns this chart owns the routes, not by force, by knowledge. Eileen listened. Then she said quietly that her father had said the same thing, word for word, and they called him crazy for it. Daniel said her father was 80% right. He didn't live to see the other 20%. They'll finish it together. Eileen turned away, quickly, so he wouldn't see her face. But he saw her shoulders shaking. She wasn't crying, or maybe she was. He didn't check. They began building the observatory a week later, on the eastern cliff, the highest point after the lighthouse. A round tower, stone, with wide windows on all sides. Inside, a chart table, shelves for instruments, a place for the sextant that Bran would bring from the mainland, and a roof that partially opened for stargazing. Eileen came to the construction site every day. She stood and watched. Sometimes she drew something on her own hand. Then she'd show Daniel and say, the window needed to be 3 degrees to the left, because the morning star rises right here this season, and if the window isn't aligned with the rising point, the measurements will be off by 0.2 of a degree. Daniel rebuilt the window. No questions asked, no arguments. Mei Lin asked once why he was rebuilding the wall over 0.2 of a degree. Daniel replied that for navigation, 0.2 of a degree is the difference between arriving at the port and running aground on the reefs. Mei Lin didn't ask any more. By the end of the summer, the observatory was standing. Eileen went inside. She laid out the maps on the table. She arranged the instruments on the shelves. She hung her father's notes on the wall, yellowed, worn, in his handwriting. She stood in front of them and looked. Daniel didn't go in. He waited outside. Half an hour later, she came out. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. The first smile he'd ever seen on her face. She said the observatory was perfect. Daniel said there were no such things as perfect buildings, only functional ones. Eileen said that to her, they were one and the same. Fall of the second year. 140 people on the island. 6 ships, 4 merchant ships, 2 military ships. The Grey Wedge and a new patrol boat built at the shipyard. Small, fast, for reconnaissance. The first ship built on the island rather than captured. Mei Lin made all the metal parts for it, every single one. She worked for 3 months, no days off. When Daniel said she needed a break, she replied that forging was her break. Convoys ran regularly, 3 routes: Greystone, Lisan; Greystone, Carvin; Greystone, Vesmar. A warship on every route, paid convoys, security for money. Money was flowing, silver, gold, goods. Greystone had become a hub through which 1/5 of the region's entire maritime trade passed. 1/5 in 2 years, from scratch. Duke Valson saw it. Daniel knew he saw it. Kaelin received letters from the continent via trusted captains. Information flowed. Valson knew about the port, about the fleet, about the convoys, about the salt, about the fact that the boy he had sent to die now controlled the routes along which supplies for his own army traveled. Valson could not tolerate this. Not because Greystone was harming him. Greystone was useful to him. His ships also used the convoys. His army bought salt from the island through middlemen. But the model itself, a neutral port that belongs to no one, that trades with everyone, that bows to no one. This model undermined everything Valson stood for. His power lay in controlling who traded with whom, and Greystone says that anyone can trade, with anyone, without permission. Kaelin said that Valson was preparing a strike, not mercenaries, not poisoners, an armada. She didn't know when, but she knew it would be in winter, because in winter the sea is stormy and convoys run less frequently, and because in winter there is a lull between campaigns on the continent, and ships can be withdrawn from the blockade of the ports. Daniel listened. He took notes. He did the math. Winter was 2 months away. 2 months to prepare. He climbed up to the lighthouse. He looked out at the bay, at his island. 140 men. 6 ships, 3 ballistas. The shipyard, the smithy, docks, warehouses. Everything he had built in 2 years. Everything that could be taken away in a single day. Daniel prepared for war as best he could. Not with a sword, with blueprints. 2 months. 60 days until the expected strike. He laid out his defenses in layers. The first layer, long range, reconnaissance. A patrol boat went out every morning. It circled the island in a wide arc, a 20-mile radius. If there were sails on the horizon, they knew about it 4 hours before the ship approached the bay. Younger Yuna at the lighthouse could see farther than anyone else, 30 miles in clear weather. She had learned to distinguish ship types by the shape of their sails from a distance of 10 miles. A cog from a galleass, a bark from a caravel, a warship from a merchant ship. Signal system, flags by day, lights by night. Every color, every combination meant a specific message. Daniel compiled a code chart. Younger Yuna memorized it in a day. Second layer, middle, fairway. There is only one entrance to the bay, narrow, between the reefs to the north and the shoal to the south, 200 meters wide. Daniel narrowed it. Sunken chains. Heavy. Iron. Mei Lin forged the links for 3 weeks, each link as thick as a fist. The chain lay at the bottom of the southern channel. The ends were secured to the shore. A winch. When the winch was started, the chain rose from the bottom to a depth of 1/2 meter, invisible from the surface, but deep enough to snag the keel of any ship with a draft of more than 2 meters. And all warships had a draft of more than 2 meters. The northern channel was already impassable, reefs. But Daniel added more: sunken logs with iron spikes, underwater stakes driven into the seabed. Any ship that tried to round the island from the north would run aground on the reefs or run into the stakes. There was only one passage left, the central one, straight into the bay, right under the ballistas. The third layer, the closest, the ballistas. 3 positions, crossfire. But Daniel added a 4th ballista on the eastern cliff, near Eileen's observatory. Eileen didn't object. She said that if the island fell, she wouldn't need the observatory. 4 ballistas, 16 stones per minute, at a range of 100 to 250 meters. In addition to the stones, Daniel added a new type of projectile, clay pots filled with burning resin, incendiary. Mei-Lin made iron frames for the pots. The idea was simple: a pot in the sling instead of a stone. Upon impact with the deck, the pot would shatter, the resin would spill, fire, the wooden ship would burn. Daniel tested the incendiary projectile on an old boat pulled ashore. The pot hit the side, it shattered, the resin spread. 30 seconds later, the boat was ablaze. Bran watched and said nothing. Then he said it was a terrible weapon. Daniel said that was exactly why they needed to have it, so they wouldn't have to use it. The 4th layer, the last, fire ships. Old boats stuffed with brushwood and resin, 3 of them. They're moored off the western shore, hidden from view. If the enemy fleet enters the bay and tries to land troops, the fire ships are launched to meet them. Burning boats among the enemy ships, chaos, fire, panic, a last resort. Daniel hoped it wouldn't come to the fire ships. Evacuation. Hidden caves on the western side of the island. Daniel had expanded them, deepened them. A 3-day supply of water, a week's worth of food, blankets, first aid supplies. Sierra checked them personally. All non-combatants head there at the signal. W. Women. Children. The elderly. The wounded. The path to the caves is hidden by bushes. It's not visible from the sea. From the shore, it's only noticeable if you know where to look. Yuna the elder made a list. Who goes where, who goes to the caves, who to the ballistas, who to the ships, who to the reserve. Every person on the island knew their place, their role, their route in case of an alarm. Daniel conducted drills 3 times, at night so as not to attract the attention of passing ships. The first drill was chaos. People ran the wrong way. They confused the signals. They bumped into each other in the dark. Evacuation time, 40 minutes. Too long. The second drill was better, 25 minutes. The third drill, 15. Daniel wanted 10. The fourth drill, 12 minutes. Enough. Alongside the defenses, he was building. He didn't stop, because stopping is a signal that he's afraid, that he's preparing, that he's waiting for a strike. Merchant ships were coming in and had to see a port that was functioning, not a port that was digging in. A new warehouse, the 5th pier, an expansion of the tavern, a 2nd floor, rooms for guests, a bathhouse, small, stone, with hot water from a boiler. Sailors, after a 2-week voyage, are willing to pay silver for hot water. Daniel knew that. Hygiene is a commodity too. The system provided blueprints, one after another, faster than before, as if the system sensed that time was short and they had to. Water reservoir, level 2. A large stone basin at the top of the cliff. Rainwater is collected and stored. A supply of fresh water for 150 people for a month. A 15% cleanliness bonus. The water spoiled more slowly. It stayed fresh longer. Fortified warehouse, level 2. Stone walls 1/2 meter thick, an iron door. Mei Lin forged the hinges and the lock. Inside, the most valuable items: salt, grain, weapons, Sira's medicines, Aileen's maps, Yuna the Elder's ledgers. Everything that couldn't be lost, even if the island was burning. Daniel stood in front of the fortified warehouse and thought. He had been building the port for 2 years, every day, no days off, no vacation. Not a single day when he hadn't hammered a nail or drawn a line. And now all of this could be destroyed in a single assault. 1 squadron, 1 order from the Duke, and 2 years of work reduced to ashes. Kaylin approached. She stood beside him, silently. Then she said she'd received a new letter. Daniel asked what it said. Kaylin said that Valsen had formed an alliance with the Salt League, temporary, for a single operation: the destruction of Greystone. The League is providing ships. Valsen is providing soldiers. A joint squadron. 18 ships. Daniel was silent. 18. He had 6. 3 ballistas. No, 4 now. Chains, pikes, fire ships. But 18 ships is serious. It's very serious. He asked when. Kaylin said in 6 weeks. Maybe 5. Daniel nodded. He went to the lighthouse. He climbed to the top. Yuna Jr. was standing nearby. She saw his face. She didn't ask. She just stood there, quietly, as always. He looked out at the sea, at the horizon, still empty, but not for long. Then he looked down, at the island, at his island, at the people, at the houses, at the smithy where smoke was rising, at the docks where the ships were moored, at the infirmary where a light was on, at the observatory where Aileen was working on a map, at the tavern where laughter could be heard. 142 people, his people, who had come because they had nowhere else to go, and stayed because they had found a home. He turned to Wai the younger. She was looking at him. Dark eyes, calm, not frightened. She had gone through the worst a person could go through, and she had come out the other side. He said there would be a battle. Yuna the younger nodded. She knew. She had seen him building defenses for the past 2 months. She wasn't stupid. He said she would have to man the lighthouse, the whole battle. Signals, flags, coordination. She was the only one who could see the entire field from above. He would be nearby, at the beacon, but she was his eyes. Younger Yuna said 1 word. Okay. The same word as the first time, when he offered her the lighthouse. Okay. Simple, quiet, no fanfare. But behind that word stood a man who had decided that this island was his home, and that she would defend her home. Daniel went down, gathered everyone. The tavern. Evening. 142 people. Standing, sitting, waiting. He said simply, "A fleet is coming. 18 ships. In 5 or 6 weeks. An alliance between Duke Valsen and the Salt League. They want to destroy the Greystone." Silence. Then noise, voices, fear, anger, questions. Daniel raised his hand. Silence again. He said they had a plan, that the defenses were ready, that everyone knew their place, that he had been building for 2 months specifically for this, that the ballistas were accurate, that the chains were in place, that the caves were ready, that the supplies were full, and that Greystone would not fall, not because the walls were strong, but because the people were stronger than the walls. He didn't like giving speeches. He's an engineer, not an orator. but 142 people were looking at him and waiting, and he said what he was thinking. He said that 2 years ago there was nothing on this rock, not a single house, not a single person, not a single reason to live. And now there is, and he personally has no intention of giving it up. Silence. Then Bran stood up. He walked over. He stood beside him, silently. Mei Lin stood up. She walked over. Yuna the Elder, Sarah, Kaelin, Aileen. Yuna the Younger came down from the lighthouse for the first time in a week. She stood beside him. Then the rest, one by one, former refugees, former sailors, former pirates, fishermen, carpenters, cooks, children. 142 people stood in the tavern and were silent. And in that silence was more than in any oath. Daniel nodded. Then he said that tomorrow morning everyone was to be at their posts, training, the 5th, the last. The people dispersed. Daniel remained in the tavern, alone. He sat down at a table, took out birch bark, charcoal, and began to sketch. A battle plan. 18 ships against the island. He drew out the possibilities. If they come from the north, if they come from the south, if they split up, if they advance in a single line. Every scenario, every response, every move. Like chess, only the board is the sea, and the pieces are alive. He sketched until dawn. By morning, he had 7 scenarios, for every response to a response. 3 moves ahead. An engineer doesn't improvise. An engineer designs. And when a plan meets reality, the one with the most backup options wins. Daniel folded the birch bark. He left the tavern. Dawn. The island was waking up. Smoke from the forges. The Bran at the pier. Yuna the Elder with the register. A typical morning, as if nothing had happened. As if in 5 weeks, 8 to wipe all of this from the face of the sea. He stood and watched. Then he went to the northern ballista to check the torsion spring tension. The countdown had begun. The squadron appeared on the horizon on the last day of autumn. Younger Yuna saw them first. She always saw them first. A red flag on the lighthouse, 3 times, then 3 more, then again. She counted the sails. Daniel climbed the lighthouse in 4 minutes, stood beside her, watched. A line of sails on the horizon. White. Many. He counted along with her. 18. Kaelin was right. Exactly 18. They were sailing in formation. 3 lines of 6 ships. A broad front. Slowly. Confidently. Like people who know they have enough strength and are in no hurry. Daniel watched the formation and calculated. Distance. Speed. Wind. At the current wind speed, they would be at the bay in 3 hours. 3 hours. He went down. Quickly. Bran and Yuna the Elder were already standing on the pier. Bran was in chainmail. Old. Rusty at the edges. But chainmail. A sword at his belt. He was ready. Yuna the Elder with birch bark. The evacuation list. Who goes where? Daniel gave the order with a single word. It began. The island sprang into action. Not chaotic. Well rehearsed. 5 drills hadn't been in vain. Women and children to the western trail, to the caves. In silence. Quickly. No shouting. Sarah in the infirmary, preparing bandages, instruments, herbs, clean water. She knew that in a few hours the wounded would be brought to her. Crews for the ballistas, 3 people each, 12 people in 4 positions. Bran on the Grey Wedge, a crew of 20, armed. Boarding hooks, javelins, swords, axes. Mei Lin on the shore by the smithy. She didn't evacuate. She said that if a shell hits the ballista, someone will have to repair it on the spot. She is that someone. Next to her is an anvil, a hammer, spare parts. Yuna the Elder is at the pier. The logbook has been moved to a fortified warehouse. Instead of the logbook, she has a list of combat crews. She was coordinating the people on shore, who goes where, who does what. Kaylin is in the caves with the civilians. Daniel wanted her there. She argued, said her place was by his side. Daniel said there were 60 people in the caves. Women, children, old people. They need someone to talk to them, to calm them down, to make decisions if things went wrong. Kaylin looked at him. She understood. She left. Eileen at the observatory, next to the 4th ballista. She wasn't firing. She was watching. Her eyes were used to seeing details from a distance. The shades of the water, the angles of the sails, the wind speed from the ripples on the surface. She was the second observer after Yuna Jr. Daniel at the lighthouse, his command post. The entire bay is visible from there. All 4 ballistas, all approaches. Younger Yuna nearby with the flags, his eyes and his voice. 12 minutes, evacuation complete, positions taken. The island froze. It waited. 2 hours of silence. Daniel watched the approaching squadron. It was growing. The sails were getting bigger, more distinct. He could see the flags. The front line under the Salt League's flag, silver on blue. The second line under the Eastern Crown's flag, gold on black. The third line was mixed, mercenaries, different flags, different ships. 18 against his 6 ships, against the island. But Daniel's ships weren't in the bay. The Grey Wedge, under Brand's command, lay behind the western cliff, hidden from view. 3 merchant cogs had left 2 days ago, southward, to safe waters. Daniel had no intention of losing his merchant fleet. The 4th cog and a patrol boat were stationed off the northern shore, also hidden, ready. The squadron approached within a mile. It stopped. Daniel saw movement on the flagship. A rowboat was lowered into the water. It headed toward the island. A white flag. A negotiator. The rowboat pulled up to the pier. An officer in the uniform of the Eastern Crown. Young. Pale. He clearly didn't want to be here. Yuna, the Elder, met him. The officer read the ultimatum. On behalf of Duke Marcus Valson and the Council of the Salt League, Greystone Island must surrender. Recognize the jurisdiction of the Eastern Crown, hand over all salt reserves, hand over the shipyard, hand over the registers. The island's ruler would face the Duke's court. Deadline, 1 hour. Yuna the Elder listened. Her face was like stone. Then she said she would pass on the message. The officer sailed away. Yuna the Elder climbed the lighthouse. She relayed the message word for word. Daniel listened. Then he took out a birch bark. He wrote a reply, a short one. Send Duke Valson a cost estimate for storming the island. 18 ships. The average cost of a cog is 12,000 silver. Losses during an assault on a fortified position are at least 40%. 7 ships. 84,000 silver. Plus crews, plus squadron supplies, plus political costs. Total, the assault will cost the Duke approximately 200,000 silver. Greystone's annual income from trade with the ships of the Eastern Crown? 15,000 silver. Payback on the capture? Never. Next to the calculation, Daniel wrote a single sentence. I propose negotiations instead of arithmetic that you won't like. Yuna the Elder took the reply to the pier. A rowboat picked it up. An hour of silence. Daniel waited. He knew Valson wouldn't accept it. The calculation wasn't for Valson. The calculation was for the League captains standing beside Valson. the ones who could count money better than dukes. Let them count. Let them think. An hour passed. The squadron moved out. Daniel saw the sails fill. The formation shifted. The first line moved forward. 6-league ships in a broad front toward the bay. They had decided to storm it. He had expected this. Option 3 out of 7. A frontal assault by the first line. Reconnaissance by combat, to see what the island is capable of. The second and third lines in reserve. Daniel raised the yellow flag. Stand by. 6 ships were approaching, fast, with the wind at their backs. They were heading straight for the central channel, the only passage, straight right under the ballistas. 1,000 meters, 800, 600. At 500 meters, Daniel saw that 2 ships had broken away from the line, headed south, a flanking maneuver. They were trying to enter through the southern channel, where the chains lay. Daniel waited. 4 ships in the central channel, 2 in the southern one. 300 meters, 250. Red flag. Volley. 4 ballistae fired simultaneously, 16 stones and pots of pitch. The lead ship took 5 hits, 2 stones in the side, 1 in the mast, 2 pots on the deck. The resin spread. Fire. The deck burst into flames. The second ship took 3 hits. A stone below the waterline. Water poured in. Reload. 20 seconds. Second volley. The lead ship was burning. Flames engulfed the sails. The crew jumped into the water. The second ship was sinking, listing to port. The third and fourth slowed down. The captain saw what was happening. Turn. The 2 remaining ships began to pull away. The southern channel. 2 ships entered it. Daniel raised the green flag, a signal for the winch. On the shore, 4 men leaned on the lever. The winch creaked. The chain began to rise. From the bottom, slowly, heavily. The first ship in the southern channel passed through. The chain hadn't had time to rise. The second didn't make it. The chain caught the keel. The ship jerked. It stopped. The screech of wood against iron. The hull split open. Water gushed in. The ship was hooked by the chain like a fish on a hook. The first southern ship ended up inside the bay, alone, without support. 4 ballistas shifted their fire onto it. 8 hits in a minute. The ship was burning and sinking at the same time. Total. 4 ships out of 6. 2 sunk by ballistas. 1 on the chain. 1 inside the bay. 2 returned to the squadron. Pause. The squadron stopped. Daniel saw commotion on the flagship. Boats were darting between the ships. A meeting. They hadn't expected this. 6 ships lost 4 in the first assault. This wasn't a reconnaissance in force. It was a rout. Daniel watched and waited. He knew this wasn't the end. Valsen still had 12 ships. Enough to try again. A different way. The pause lasted 4 hours. The sun had passed its zenith and was beginning to dip toward the west. Daniel didn't come down from the lighthouse. Una Jr. was nearby. They drank water from a canteen, ate crackers, in silence. He watched the squadron and thought. 12 ships. Valsen had lost a third of his fleet and gained nothing. Any normal commander would have retreated. But Valsen was no ordinary commander. Valsen was a duke who had spent 6 months organizing this operation. A duke who had convinced the Salt League to provide the ships. A duke who had promised a result. To retreat now would mean losing. Not the battle. Face. And for a duke, face is more valuable than ships. The squadron reformed. Daniel saw the 12 ships form a new formation. Not a frontal one. 2 wings, 6 in each. One wing headed north, the other south. A flanking maneuver from both sides. Option 5 out of 7. Daniel had expected this. The northern wing, 6 ships, they were heading for the northern reefs. It's impassable there. Reefs. Stakes. But they don't know about the stakes. They only know about the reefs. And the League captains know that the reefs can be bypassed if they sail close to the cliffs. A narrow passage, 30 meters, where Daniel drove in the stakes. The southern wing, 6 ships. They saw the chains in the southern channel. One of their ships was still stuck on them, but the southern channel is long. The chain blocks only the central part. If you sail right along the spit's shore, you can try to go around it. Shallow, dangerous, but possible for ships with a shallow draft. Daniel estimated the draft of the League's ships of the League. Cogges, 2.5 meters. The depth near the spit's shore is 2 meters. They won't make it. But Valsen's galleasses, 1.5 meters. They'll make it. If there are galleasses in the southern wing. He looked through his spyglass. Bran had brought it from the mainland 4 months ago. It cost 50 silver pieces. The southern wing. 3 cogs, 3 galleasses. Valsen knew about the shallows. Someone had tipped him off. Someone who had been to the island. A captain. A merchant. Someone who had called at the port and measured the depths. Daniel made a mental note of this. After the battle, he would have to find out who. The northern wing was closer. They would be the first to reach the reefs. Daniel watched as 6 ships rounded the island from the north, slowly, carefully. The captains knew the reefs were dangerous. They were proceeding at a slow pace. They sounded the depths, with a sounding line. The lead ship found a passage, the very one, 30 meters, between the reef ridge and the rocky shore. It went through. Daniel counted, 10 meters, 20. The ship struck a stake, underwater. An iron spike pierced the hull. The ship jolted. It listed. Water. The second ship was already entering the passage. It saw the first one running aground. It tried to turn around. It didn't make it. Reefs on the right, cliffs on the left. 30 meters. Not enough room to turn. The second ship struck the reef with its side. The hull cracked. Not critical, but it was stuck. The third ship stopped at the entrance, the fourth behind it. A traffic jam. 6 ships in a narrow passage. The first is sinking. The second is on the reef. The rest can neither pass nor turn. The northern ballista opened fire. 100 meters away, almost point blank. Stones and pots of resin. The third ship took an incendiary shot right in the sail. A flash. The fire spread through the fabric. Debris from the burning sail falls onto the deck. Panic. People jump into the water. Between the reefs, sharp ones, cold water. Screams. The fourth ship reverses course. Oars. The rowers are working at their limit. It crawls out of the passage. Behind it, the fifth and sixth. 3 ships have retreated. 3 remained in the channel. 1 was sinking. 1 on the reef. 1 was burning. The northern wing was destroyed. 3 out of 6. The southern wing. Daniel shifted his attention. 6 ships were rounding the island from the south. 3 cogs in front, 3 galleasses behind them. The cogs won't make it through the shallows. They know that. The cogs were a diversion. They were heading for the southern channel, toward the chain. Daniel saw a rowboat lowered from one of the cogs. In the rowboat were men with tools. They were going to cut the chain. While the cogs distract the Balinese, the 3 galleasses would sail through the shallows along the spit, bypass the chain. Enter the bay. A landing party. Daniel raised a blue flag, a signal for Bran. The gray wedge emerged from behind the western cliff, under oars, quietly, quickly. It came up behind the southern wing. The cogs turned around. They abandoned the boat with the men. 3 cogs against 1 gray wedge. They have the numbers. But the gray wedge is bigger, heavier, with iron sides. Bran went straight for the lead cog, a ram, not a full one, a glancing blow to the side. Mei Lin sliced through the cog's plating like a knife through bark. The cog spun. It lost its oars on the port side, immobilized. Bran sailed past. The second cog tried to escape. The third turned to face the Klein. Boarding. Grappling hooks flew from both sides. The ships locked together. Bran was the first to leap onto the enemy deck, sword in hand. 20 of his men followed him. Hand-to-hand combat. Brief. Brutal. The cogs of the cog were not warriors. League sailors. Merchants in uniform. They surrendered after 10 minutes. While Bran dealt with the cogs, 3 galleasses made their way through the shallows, along the spit, quietly, under oars. Draft of 1.5 meters, depth of 2. They passed through. Daniel saw them from the lighthouse. 3 narrow, long ships glided through the shallows like snakes. They bypassed the chain. They were entering the bay. Soldiers on the decks, 30 on each, 90 men, a landing party. Daniel raised a white flag with a red cross, a signal for the fire ships. 3 old boats stuffed with brushwood and resin. They were moored off the western shore. 3 men, 1 on each. They set the brushwood alight. They pushed off from the shore, jumped into the water, swam toward the shore. 3 burning boats drifted with the wind, straight toward the incoming galleasses. The wind was from the west. Perfect. Daniel had calculated this 2 weeks ago. A winter wind from the west. The fire ships would drift from the western shore to the east, straight into the bay, straight at the incoming ships. The first galley spotted the burning boat too late, tried to dodge it. Shallow water, no room to maneuver. The fire ship rammed the side. Burning pitch spread across the hull. Fire. The second galley managed to turn away, the third one too, but they lost formation. They were thrown off balance. And at that moment, 4 ballistas turned their fire on them. Incendiary projectiles, pots of resin. The second galley took 2 pots on the deck. It was burning. The third took a stone in the stern. The rudder was broken. The ship lost control. It spun in place, helpless. The southern and eastern ballistas finished it off methodically, stone after stone. Within 5 minutes, all 3 galleasses were burning or sinking. 90 landing troops found themselves in the water. Cold winter water. Those who could swim swam toward the spit, toward the shore. 27 men made it onto the sand, wet, unarmed. Most of their weapons were at the bottom of the sea. They were met by Daniel's men, with swords, with spears, with crossbows. 27 soaked soldiers against 40 armed defenders on the shore. The soldiers surrendered, without a fight. Daniel came down from the lighthouse. He walked to the spit. The wet soldiers sat on the sand, hands behind their heads. Some were shivering, not from fear, from the cold. He ordered them to be taken to the tavern, given dry clothes, hot food. They were prisoners, not the dead. Then he looked out at the sea. Smoke. Lots of smoke. Debris. Burning hulls. Sinking ships. And far on the horizon, receding sails. 5 ships. All that remained of the squadron of 18. 5. 13 lost. Sunk. Burned. Captured. Aground on the reefs. The Battle of Grey Rock was over. The morning after the battle, Daniel stood on the main pier. The sea was still steaming. Debris drifted across the bay. The mast of one of the cogs jutted out of the water like a grave cross. Planks and rags and barrels and bodies floated on the surface. They were gathering the bodies, all of them, without distinction, friends and foes alike. Daniel had ordered it. Everyone would receive a burial. A sailor is a sailor. It doesn't matter under whose flag. Bran was on the pier, bandaged, a cut on his forearm, deep. Sierra had stitched it up. He was in charge of salvaging the captured ships. 4 ships could be saved. 2 cogs from the southern wing, 1 cog from the northern wing that had run aground, and 1 galleass that had been on fire but not completely destroyed. Daniel's crews were at work, stripping the rigging, pumping out the water, starting the tugboats. Mei Lin was already on one of the captured cogs, cutting metal, shackles, staples, chains, anchors. She worked in silence, intently. Her stockpile would be replenished for the next 6 months. She knew this and worked with the expression of a craftsman who has found good material. Not joy, businesslike. Sarah left the infirmary for the first time in 20 hours. Her hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her apron was brown. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She walked silently out onto the pier and sat down right on the planks. She dangled her legs over the water. She sat. She watched. She didn't move. Daniel didn't approach. He knew what she needed. Silence. 5 minutes of silence without moans and blood and torn flesh. The infirmary was full. Not her people. The enemies. Burned. With broken bones. With lacerations from the reefs. She treated them. Everyone. Without asking whose they were. Just as she would treat her own. Kaylin emerged from the caves. With her were 60 people. Women, children, the elderly, the living. Everyone. Not a single casualty among the civilians. 0. Because 2 hours before the first shot was fired, they were already in the rocks. Safe. Kaylin approached Daniel with a parchment. It was a draft, written at night by candlelight in the cave while the battle raged outside. A draft of a treaty. She had worked while the battle was raging, because she knew that after the battle, words would be needed, not swords. Daniel took the parchment. He read it. The Treaty of Greystone. Preamble. The island of Greystone is declared neutral territory. It belongs to no kingdom. It is subject to no league. Article 1. All ships of all nations have the right to enter the port duty-free. Article 2. Military hostilities between any parties are prohibited on the island's territory. Article 3. Greystone guarantees the safety of cargo and people on its territory. Article 4. Any attack on Greystone is considered an attack on neutral trade territory and results in the port being closed to the aggressor. Article 5. Greystone does not enter into alliances and does not participate in wars. Daniel read. Kaylin stood nearby, waiting. He looked up. He said that Article 4 needed to be strengthened, not just closing the port, closing the convoy routes. Without Greystone's convoys, no trade caravan would reach the southern ports. This is not a threat. It is a fact, and this fact makes an attack on the island suicidal for any economy that depends on maritime trade. And now everything depends on it. Kaylin nodded. She took notes. Daniel continued. Article 6. Port service fees are fixed for all parties. No privileges, no discounts for friends, no markups for enemies. Everyone is equal. Kaylin looked at him. She said it looked good on paper but was impossible in practice. Daniel replied that it was possible, if records are kept, if every transaction is recorded, if every captain knows that his terms are exactly the same as everyone else's. Yuna the Elder will ensure that. She is already ensuring it. The treaty needed to be signed. But with whom? Valsen had lost the battle, but not the war. The Salt League had lost ships, but not influence. The Northern Kingdom did not participate, but had interests at stake. The southern cities depended on the convoys. Everyone was needed. All 7 kingdoms, all the trade leagues, all the free cities. Kaelin said it was impossible to gather enemies around one table. Daniel said it was possible, if the table stood in the one place everyone needed. He sent letters, 7 letters, to the 7 kingdoms, 3 letters to the trade leagues, 2 letters to the free cities. Identical text. Greystone invites you to negotiations on neutrality. Location: neutral waters within a day's sail of the island. Date: in 1 month. Each letter bears a signature: Dan Corvus, Lord of Greystone, and a postscript. The port is open to all who sign the treaty, closed to those who refuse. Bran delivered the letters in 2 weeks. To Grey Wedge, with a convoy of 2 cogs. Each letter was delivered personally, with a show of force. Bran sailed into the harbor, unloaded salt, displayed the flag, a gray triangle on white, and sailed away, in silence. Rumors of the battle had already spread. 18 ships against the island, 13 destroyed. The details were growing more exaggerated by the day. Some said the island was protected by magic. Others claimed there were 1,000 warriors there. Still others said the island's lord had a fleet of 40 ships. Daniel didn't deny it. The exaggerations worked in his favor. As long as the world feared the Greystone, he didn't need to spend money on defense. A month of waiting. Daniel didn't sit idle. He built. Post-battle repairs. Restoring the pier. Replacing the fireships. Restocking the supply of stones and pots for the ballistas. Expanding the cascade. 60 basins. A salt output of 4,000 pounds a month. And something new. The system provided a blueprint the day after the battle. The port tower, level 2. A stone tower at the main pier, 15 meters high, with rooms for negotiations, with an archive for documents, with an observation deck, and administrative center. Not just a warehouse and a pier, an institution, a place where decisions are made, where contracts are kept, where records are kept not just for one port, but for an entire trading network. It took 3 weeks to build. Every available hand, stone, wood, iron. Mei Lin forged iron balcony railings for the tower, not for beauty, for strength. But they turned out to be beautiful. She didn't try. It's just that the hands of a blacksmith with 20 years of experience make beautiful things without even thinking about it. Aileen hung her map in the tower's main hall, a map of the currents of the inner sea, complete. Comprehensive. Every current, every wind corridor, every seasonal shift. The map covered the entire wall, 3 meters by 2. Ink on bleached canvas, a work of art and science at the same time. Daniel stood in front of the map and looked at it. 20 minutes. Then he said quietly that her father would be proud. Eileen stood beside him. She didn't answer. But Daniel saw her straighten up, just a little, by a centimeter, like a person from whom a burden had been lifted. The tower stood, the gray stone harbor tower, with a flag at the top, a gray triangle, visible from the sea 5 miles away. A sign, a symbol. Here is the harbor, here is the law, here it is safe. Daniel released the prisoners, all of them. 27 soldiers and sailors from the captured ships, about 80 men. He gave them 2 of the captured cogs, repaired ones, with a week's supply of water and food. He let them go. Bran was against it. Negotiations were scheduled for the 20th day of winter, in neutral waters, a day's sail from the island. Daniel was leaving Greystone for the first time in 2 years. The system warned him. Beyond the island, no blueprints, no bonuses, no hints, just an ordinary man. He stood on the pier. The gray wedge was waiting. Bran was on the bridge. The crew was ready. Next to Daniel was Kaylin, in a new dress, not a court dress, sober, black. She had altered it herself from ship's fabric. On her belt was a silver buckle that Mei Lin had forged especially. Simple, elegant. No coats of arms, no symbols. The Greystone did not belong to dynasties. Its symbols were different. Yuna the Elder stood on the pier with the logbook. She wasn't seeing them off. She was working. Ships were coming in even on the day of the negotiations. The port never stopped. Never. Seda came out of the infirmary. She approached, handed Daniel a small pouch, herbs inside. She said it was for seasickness, just in case. Daniel took it. He didn't mention that 2 years ago he'd been vomiting from the rocking for 2 days, and that he hadn't been on a ship since. Mei Lin stood by the forge. She nodded, silently. She didn't like long goodbyes. She liked it when people left and came back, without unnecessary words. Eileen came down from the observatory. She handed him a rolled-up map, a small one, a copy of the section of the inner sea around the negotiation site. Every reef, every current, every depth, in case they had to leave quickly. Daniel took the map. He looked at the current lines drawn by a hand that used to draw on its own skin when there was no paper. Then he looked at Eileen. She was looking at him. There was something in her eyes, something he saw but couldn't name. Or maybe he could, but didn't dare. Yuna Jr. hadn't come down from the lighthouse. Daniel looked up. She was standing on the platform, a tiny figure against the sky. She raised her hand. He raised his in response. That was enough. The gray wedge left the bay. Daniel stood at the stern and watched as the island grew smaller. The cliffs, the lighthouse, the tower's smoke, docks, tiny figures of people. His island, his world, his power, and his cage. He felt the system shutting down, not abruptly, smoothly, like a sound fading away. The blueprints vanished, the bonuses faded, the prompts fell silent. He stood on the deck as an ordinary man, without magic, without the system, with only what was in his head, with 15 years of experience, with 2 years on the island, with a negotiation plan written on birch bark. The meeting place, the open sea. 3 ships lay at anchor, flying the flags of 3 factions, the Eastern Crown, the Salt League, the Northern Kingdom. The others didn't show up. Of the 12 invited, 3 came. But these were the 3 most important ones. Kaylin said the rest were waiting. They're watching to see what these 3 will say. If the 3 sign, the rest will join. If not, then not. The negotiations took place on board the Northern Kingdom's ship, a neutral deck, a long table at the stern, under an awning. The wind ruffled the edges. The sea rocked. At the table, from the Eastern Crown, the Duke of Valsen's ambassador. Not the Duke himself, the ambassador, an elderly man, tired, with the eyes of a man who had spent too many years uttering words he did not believe in. From the Salt League, Lord Tass, the very one, who had conducted the inspection, who had seen the cascade and the warehouse and the registry. He sat calmly. He already knew that the Greystone was no trifle. From the Northern Kingdom, Duchess Marin, a woman of 50, gray hair, a stern mouth. She had ruled the northern province in the king's absence while he fought on the Eastern Front. She wanted peace, not out of kindness, out of calculation. The war had cost her too much. Daniel sat down at the table, Kaelin beside him, Bran behind him, standing. He didn't have his hand on his sword. But the sword was there. Daniel placed a scroll on the table. The Treaty of Greystone. Kaelin read it aloud, article by article. Neutrality. Free access. A ban on military action. Equal prices. Closing the port to the aggressor. Ambassador Valsin listened. His face was blank. Then he spoke. He said that Duke Valsin did not recognize Dan Corvus's claim to the island, that Corvus had been exiled by law of the Eastern Crown, that the island belonged to the Crown, that everything built on it belonged to the Crown. Daniel listened. Then he replied. He said he understood the Duke's position, and that he had a counterposition. 13 ships at the bottom of the sea, 4 in the port of Greystone as trophies, 5 that had retreated, 80 men released from captivity in good health. That was his position. Silence. Lord Tass coughed. Quiet. Duchess Marin stared at Daniel without looking away. Ambassador Valsina was silent. Daniel continued. He said he wasn't asking for recognition. He wasn't asking for an apology. He wasn't asking for compensation. He was asking for one thing: to be left in peace. Greystone will trade with everyone, repair everyone's ships, treat all sailors, sell salt to everyone at a single price, no exceptions. It's more profitable than war. He placed a second document on the table, a calculation, annual turnover of maritime trade through Greystone, 200,000 silver. Of that, taxes and duties collected by ports of destination, about 40,000. If Greystone closes, those 40,000 will disappear, plus the cost of lost cargo, plus the cost of delays, plus the cost of ships that won't be repaired and will sink. In total, closing Greystone will cost the continent at least 100,000 silver per year. Tass looked at the calculation. He counted. He checked. Daniel saw his lips moved. Tass counted, and the numbers added up. Because Daniel didn't lie. He never lied in his calculations. Duchess Marin spoke first. She said the Northern Kingdom would sign, because she needed the port. She needed convoys. She needed salt at a reasonable price. And she didn't need another war. Tass signed second, silently. He affixed the League's seal. Ambassador Valsin signed last, after 2 hours of silence. He said he was signing under protest, that Duke Valsin reserved the right to contest it. Daniel said that everyone had the right to contest it. He pointed to the sea around them. 13 ships had contested it. They were at the bottom. The ambassador signed. 3 signatures, 3 seals. The Treaty of Greystone. The first international document of this world in which the neutrality of a trading territory was recognized as a right rather than a privilege. Daniel rolled up the treaty, put it in his inside pocket, stood up, bowed, got into the rowboat, returned to the gray wedge. Bran turned the ship toward home. Daniel stood at the bow, the wind in his face, salty, cold, wintry. A lighthouse appeared on the horizon ahead, a small point of light. Una Jr. had lit it even though it was still daytime. She had seen the wedge and lit it. For him. So he could see the way home. The system returned when the island appeared on the horizon. At first it was quiet, like a whisper. Then louder. Blueprints, bonuses, hints. Everything came back. He was back on his turf. He was the architect again. A year had passed since the signing. His third year on the island. Winter was over. Spring brought ships. Many ships. More than ever before. The treaty was working. All 7 kingdoms joined within 3 months of the first 3 signatures. Just as Kalen had predicted, the free cities signed next, the trading leagues last. Everyone, without exception. Greystone became a point on every map, not a blank spot, a port, real, recognized, protected by international law. A population of 214 people. Daniel counted every one, not because the system required it, because each one was a story. Bran commanded the fleet, 10 ships, 6 merchant ships, 4 military, convoys on 5 routes, every week, without fail. In 2 years, not a single Greystone convoy had lost a ship, not a single one, because Bran knew the sea, because Eileen knew the currents, because Daniel knew logistics. Those 3 areas of expertise combined provided a safety that money couldn't buy. Bran had changed. Not his face, not his body, his expression. When he first set foot on the island 3 years ago, he was a man with nothing to lose, a dead man walking. Now he was a captain, not a mercenary, not a debtor, captain of his own fleet, with men who followed him not because they were paid, but because they trusted him. Daniel saw this and said nothing. He knew that the best gift for Bran wasn't words. It was that every morning Bran would step out onto the pier and see his ships. Una the Elder ran the port. Not the registry, the port. Every ship, every cargo, every berth, every ton of salt, every barrel of fish, everything went through her. She created a system unlike any other on the continent. Standard forms, standard records, standard procedures. Any newcomer could learn to work at the port in a week because everything was described and documented, not in one person's head, on birch bark, in the tower's archives. Una the Elder no longer clenched her fists when she entered the room. Daniel noticed this one morning. She entered the tower. Her arms hung loosely at her sides. Her back was straight, but her fists were unclenched. She wasn't preparing for a fight. She was going to work, to a place where her right to be there was never questioned, by anyone, ever. Because without her, the port didn't function, and everyone knew it. Sarah had expanded the infirmary. 3 rooms, 6 beds, a separate room for surgery, a separate one for storing medicines, a herb garden on the southern slope. She had grown 32 varieties of medicinal herbs, some brought from the mainland, some found on the island. 3 students, young women from among the residents. She taught them anatomy, herbs, poisons, bandaging, surgery. In 5 years there would be 4 doctors on the island instead of 1. Sarah thought ahead, not a month, years. There were no religious symbols in the infirmary, not a single one. But on the shelf by the window stood a small clay cup, one that Daniel had made himself, crooked, uneven. He's no potter, but he made it. Sarah drank from it every morning, not because the cup was good, because someone made it for her, not for the temple, not for God, for her. Maylene. The smithy had doubled in size. 2 forges, 3 anvils, 5 apprentices. She forged not just for the island, for the entire region. Greystone's ship fittings became the standard. Captains asked for them specifically. Because they're uniform. Because they fit. Because every bracket bears a mark. A circle with a hammer. Maylene's mark. She never asked to have it stamped. Daniel suggested it. He said that quality should have a name. She silently forged the stamp and began to brand. Every rivet, every shackle, every nail. A circle with a hammer. her signature, her name in metal. She was no longer the woman who had been graciously allowed to work. She was Mei Lin, the blacksmith of Greystone, whose brand was worth more than the name of any master on the continent. Kaylin handled foreign policy, letters, negotiations, meetings with ambassadors who now came regularly. She sat at a table in the port tower, in a black dress with a silver clasp, and she spoke with dukes, just as she had promised. One day a letter arrived from her uncle, from Duke Valsin himself, not through an ambassador, personally. He asked Kaylin to return, offered a title, lands, forgiveness. Kaylin read the letter, folded it neatly. She put it in the fire, watched it burn. Then she went back to work. Daniel didn't ask. She didn't tell him. Some things don't need words. Eileen finished the large map, a complete map of all the currents of the inner sea and the 3 oceans surrounding Sorrentor. A lifetime's work, hers and her father's. The map hung in the harbor tower, 3 meters by 2. Every captain entering the tower saw it first. Some stood before it for minutes, because there was no map like it anywhere else. Copies sold for 20 silver pieces. Accurate. Licensed by the Greystone. Eileen received a cut from every copy. She was richer than most of the captains calling at the port. But she wore the same ink-stained clothes and drew on her hands when she was deep in thought. She told Daniel once that her father wasn't crazy. Daniel replied that no, he wasn't. He was the first. And the first are always considered crazy, until someone proves they were right. Eileen said quietly that he had proven it. Daniel said it wasn't him. It was her. He had only built the observatory. Yuna Jr. She had turned 20. 3 years at the lighthouse. She knew the sea better than anyone on the island. She could see a storm 2 hours before it arrived. She could make out ships 15 miles away. She taught 4 teenagers how to navigate by the stars. They became navigators, the best in the region, because they had Eileen's map and younger Yuna's knowledge, and the training system Daniel had helped devise. Her younger sister, Daniel hadn't forgotten. Bran found her on the mainland. In a workhouse in Calteris, bought her out, brought her back. Younger Yuna was standing on the pier when the ship came in. She didn't know. Daniel hadn't told her beforehand. A little girl stepped onto the pier, skinny, frightened, looking around. Younger Yuna saw her, froze, then took a step, then she ran. She ran for the first time in 3 years. She fell to her knees before her sister, hugged her, held her close. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her tears had run dry long ago on the galley, but she held her sister and wouldn't let go for a long time. Daniel stood on the pier. He watched. Then he left, quietly. There are moments when a third person is superfluous, even if that third person built the pier they were standing on. There was something beneath the island, Daniel had known for a long time, ever since Eileen found the stone door while digging a tunnel for the new warehouse. An inscription in a language no one knew, but Daniel read it, effortlessly, as if he had always known that language. The inscription read, "To those who build, not destroy. The archive is open." He didn't go down, not right away, because he knew that what lay below would change everything. And he wanted to make sure first that what was above was strong enough to withstand any change. Now it was strong. He went down, alone. Down a stone staircase carved into the rock 1,000 years ago. Below was a hall, large, round. The walls were covered with drawings, thousands of drawings. Ships, ports, bridges, roads, aqueducts, lighthouses, sewer systems, methods of water desalination, methods of metal processing, methods of food preservation. Civilization. An entire civilization recorded on the walls. Those who were before. They were not magicians. They were engineers, like him. They built an empire not with the sword, but with standards, not through conquest, but through infrastructure. And their own priests destroyed them, decided that knowledge without morality was dangerous, sealed the archive, flooded the temple, and left, leaving a condition. The archive would open to the one who came without a choice, without weapons, without allies, to the one who would build not on conquest, but on necessity. Daniel stood in the center of the hall. The system flickered around him, brighter than ever. The blueprints on the walls glowed. Each blueprint was a technology that could change the world. He could take them all of them. Build a fleet the world had never seen. Build a weapon that would make him invincible. Build an empire. He could. He stood and watched for a long time. Then he turned toward the door. He climbed the stairs. He went up to the surface. He sealed the entrance. Not forever. Just for now. He isn't ready. The world isn't ready. Those who were before were wrong. Not about the technology. They were wrong about the pace. They gave too much, too fast. Daniel won't repeat that. He'll take the blueprints one by one, slowly, as the world is able to accept them. Not weapons, not ships. Aqueducts, desalination plants, food preservation methods, things that save, not kill. The rest can wait. He returned to the pier. Evening. The sun was setting. The sea was golden. Bran was on the deck of the Grey Wedge, checking the rigging before the morning voyage. Mei Lin was in the smithy, the sound of a hammer. Steady, like the island's heartbeat. Sarah was washing her hands by the infirmary. She looked up, smiled. A small smile. A warm one. Kaylin was the tower, sitting at a table, a quill in her hand, a letter to some duke, polite, with a hidden meaning. Eileen at the observatory, drawing something on her hand, lost in thought. Forgot about dinner, as always. Yuna the elder at the pier, the logbook, the last ship of the day. She wrote it down, closed the scroll, watched the sunset. Younger Yuna at the lighthouse, lit the lens. The light struck the evening sky, white, bright, visible 30 miles away. Next to her on the lighthouse platform, a small figure, her sister, sitting there, dangling her feet in the air, smiling. 214 people. His people. Not subjects, not an army, not a tool. People who came to this barren rock because they had nowhere else to go, and found a home. Daniel took a piece of chalk out of his pocket, that very one, worn down to a stub. He'd used it to draw an arrow on the rock on the first day. He'd used it to write the port's name on the dock planks a year ago. He crouched down, on a dock plank between 2 barrels of salt, and wrote, Grey Rock, population 214, free. He put a period. The chalk broke. The little stub couldn't take it. Daniel looked at the shards of chalk in his palm, then at the inscription, then at the port, at the lighthouse, at the tower, at the smithy, at the infirmary, at the observatory, at the ships, at the people, at the sea that 3 years ago had been empty and hostile and was now a road. He stood up. He placed the chalk shards on the barrel next to the inscription. They wouldn't be needed anymore. The port was working. The people were working. The system was working. Convoys were coming and going. Salt was being poured into barrels. A hammer struck the anvil. Maps were drawn. Wounds were healed. The registry was filled. Ships came and went. And the lighthouse burned every night, visible 30 miles away, telling every captain in the darkness the same thing. Here is the port. Here is safety. Here is home.